The whir of machinery, screams of the unknown, clanks with hooves on corrugated metal sheets, all sounds that one would associate with Subsection 7R of the Weather Factory, or at least those who were privileged enough to see it. Having that plastic ID reading Clearance R in bold text alongside the blazing rainbow stripe down its side, it was the dream of many Pegasi. Not just in the factory, but to many little fillies and foals who, just like those before them, wanted to carry the pride of Cloudsdale on their backs. It was the way it had always been. Cloudsdale took pride in creating the weather for Equestria, conjuring storms and sunshine alike, but no weather phenomenon was as respected and adored as the rainbow. Perhaps it was its spectrum of hues that inspired awe in all that saw it arch across the sky, or perhaps it is its mysterious and unknown origin. Many ponies could figure out the creation of the other weather events. Rain or snow are simply water after all, but none, not even the residents of Cloudsdale, could pin down exactly how rainbows were made. Its closely guarded recipe was kept close to the heads of the Weather Factory. It was even rumoured that even royalty couldn't conjure the spectacular spectrum of colours that the Weather Factory could produce. Each hue is more vibrant and vivid than anything PonyCon had ever seen before. The only way to know how this mythical imagery is created is to get that idolised position in the Weather Factory, Clearance R. Very few ponies who have access to Subsection 7R are known. In fact, only one is officially confirmed, the head of Subsection 7R herself, Rainbow Dash. There are other ponies, of course. How else would rainbows get made if there weren't? But most who go in don't come out, and those who do often aren't the same. Only one explanation has been offered as to why this is. Making the components of a rainbow is difficult and stressful work that can take weeks at a time. This would leave any pony drained of energy. The public accepted this for a long time. Every pony went about their day as individuals slipped away behind the doors of 7R, returning as broken and dull ponies that couldn't or wouldn't elaborate on their time inside. It developed a nickname around Cloudsdale as cases became more and more common. FSD, or Factory Stress Desaturation. Ponies with FSD often would never return to a regular life, completely restricted by the phenomenon. As more and more families and friends were torn apart by this disorder, public outcry grew louder and louder. Pressure on the Weather Factory grew. After the sudden withdrawal of Rainbow Dash from her PR position in the factory, a solution had to be found. Trotting up to the train station in Manhattan was a young Pegasi scholar, dark brown mane and light green coat, dressed in an unusual combination of vest, shirt and pants, unlike most ponies around who often forewent the idea in disgust of covering their cutie mark. On each side of his hips rode a brown leather saddlebag, notes and papers overflowing from its barely buttoned top, all notes and journals related to his research, a new field of healthcare, one focused on the mind instead of the body. He was off to Canterlot to catch a hot air balloon to Cloudsdale. It wasn't as if he couldn't fly. Of course he could. He managed to barely pass his flight exam when he was a young foal. Hot air balloon travel was just easier and safer, especially when carrying papers and research. As he stepped onto the train and found a seat, he found himself reminiscing on the past, his upbringing in Cloudsdale. It had been such a long time since he had seen the fluffy white streets. He had left as soon as he could pursue his research, but he never could have expected it to lead him back home. The call came in the form of a white envelope. No differentiating markings or even return address. Inside was a simplistic and straightforward letter with no signature or name. We have heard of your research and want to offer an opportunity to study a yet-to-be-documented condition. As a former resident of Cloudsdale, and the only Pegasus nearby in this field, we expect that we will see you at 1 PM outside the Weather Factory. An associate will be there to greet you. This situation was strange. Ominous offers like this are uncommon, and even more uncommonly are accepted. But the possibility of forwarding the scholar's research was too tempting. Anyhow, Cloudsdale was always a safe place when he was young. What could go wrong? He was snapped out of deep thought as the carriage jolted to a stop. He heard the conductor bellowing from the front of the train car. "Canterlot?" This was his stop. Had he been thinking for that long? It was a short walk from the train to the air balloon stop, and the excitement only grew for the green Pegasi. What kind of conditions would he encounter? What kind of help could he provide? Who exactly was hiring him? It was all a blur of thoughts and questions that came and went in the flap of a Pegasus's wings, that of which was becoming more and more common as he got closer to Cloudsdale. Pegasus returning home from work or visits to other places whizzed past, enjoying their flight through the sky. It caused the researcher's wings to twitch in excitement. He was home. His hoofs made contact with the fluffy cloud street outside of the air balloon drop-off, sending waves of nostalgia through his mind. Pleasant memories of childhood friends, first love, and his parents, followed by bitter memories of the first heartbreaks and the day he left. It was bittersweet, but there was little time for reminiscing on the past. The clock on the hot air balloon drop-off said it was 1:45. He couldn't afford to be late. The soft thumps of his hooves sped up as he accelerated towards his destination, the weather factory. After sprinting down the streets towards the weather factory, earning the researcher some concerned glares from the residents, he managed to arrive just before the clock struck 1. The delightful Westminster chimes of the clock sung, followed by a lone, solitary ringing of the bell. Almost as if awakened by the noise, a bright blue pony with a purple mane tied in a bun swung the door open. A look of joy spread across their face as their gaze met the researchers. "Ah, I'm glad you could make it, Mr. Thornbred. My name is Azure. I hope your trip was pleasant." "I suppose it was. I was certainly excited to meet you. The letter you sent was rather mysterious and vague," Thornbred replied as he trotted towards Azure, who quickly moved back inside the factory, suggesting that Thornbred should follow. "Yeah, sorry about that. The higher-ups have a strict policy on hiring external help. Something about the privacy of those within the corporation?" "I suppose so, but doesn't the weather factory offer tours to any pony that comes by? They've always been so open about most of their employees and operations. Why the need for such high security?" Thornbred scowled, thinking deeply about the situation. Whilst anonymity was a big factor in his research, this seemed a bit extreme. The weather factory was not only a factory, but somewhat of a tourist destination where employees would take Pegasus, even unicorns and earth ponies, from all over Equestria around the site. With such transparency, what exactly did they need to hide from anyone who might accidentally receive his letter? Azure closed the door, keeping a generally joyous demeanour. "Whilst that is mostly true, Mr. Thornbred, the factory does attempt to be honest about its practices. There is one major exception, however. Subsection 7R? I remember hearing all about it as a little foal. It's all every pony ever wanted to be. The ultimate dream in school. As I grew up, I somewhat doubted that it even existed." Thornbred butted in. He usually wasn't one to do this, but having the sudden rush of memories come back from his childhood made his manners slip slightly, causing an interrupted outburst. "Yep, Subsection 7R, one of the most important places in the whole factory, where the components for rainbows are made. Although I'm sure you knew that already." Azure took the reins of the conversation once more, leading Thornbred towards and up a staircase leading to the upper levels of the factory. Normally they would fly up through the hole in the middle of the spiral, but she knew it would be nearly impossible with all the notes Thornbred was carrying. One thing I don't think you would have heard of, however, is the recent problems with ponies who work in that area. It has been nicknamed Factory Stress Desaturation, or FSD. "I'm assuming that's why I've been called here?" Thornbred responded, the ignition of a deep desire to discover all about FSD as they could sparking into life inside of their mind. "I would assume so. As per usual when discussing Subsection 7R, the higher-ups don't provide any details to anyone who doesn't have clearance are, me included. I'm just some sort of messenger," Azure said with a hint of spite in her voice. It was easy to assume that she, alongside many ponies working in the factory, was always irritated by the fact that she wasn't allowed to enter that part of the facility. Whether it would be pride or curiosity, it was an irritating experience. "Well, you look to know what you were talking about," Thornbred responded, trying to cheer the down Pegasus up and distract them from the lack of position they desperately wished they had. "It's difficult not to know at this point. The ponies with FSD stick out like an earth pony in a crowd of Pegasus, dull and zombie-like, with no expression on their faces. It's eerie." Thornbred had heard of symptoms like this before in his excessive research, but never all at once. It was going to be a new experience studying ponies with the condition. "But it's a job. I dreamed of working here since I was a foal. Looking out my bedroom window and seeing the factory made me feel in a way no other could." Azure continued, smiling wildly as she recalled the fond memories of childhood. "I understand that feeling. I always wanted to be a researcher of some kind, but it's also hard to deny that I wanted to work here too," Thornbred responded, recalling the past similarly to Azure, a similar feeling of warmth and nostalgia arising from the foggy images. "Who didn't? It was all any pony ever talked about in the playground. Well, except for the Wonderbolts, of course, but the factory was where I belonged. It's even how I got my cutie mark." Azure beamed, slowing down and raising the flank closest to Thornbred to show off the emblem on its surface. A sun covered partly by a cloud, with 3 small snowflakes falling downwards towards her knee. She quickly began walking normally again once Thornbred had looked over. Thornbred smiled at the design. Cutie marks of all different ponies were always interesting to look at. Infinite possibilities all cater to the uniqueness of the individual. I remember when everyone was getting their cutie marks. It's always such a wonderful occasion, all excited and proud to finally have a purpose. Thornbred smiled warmly, recounting seeing all his friends getting their cutie marks in school. It wasn't so wonderful for me. I got mine later on in life. Spent most, maybe even all my childhood without one. I got bullied so much by the kids for it. But it just made the day I got mine even better. Azure proudly stated, lifting her head high in pride. Say, what about you? Don't see many ponies wearing pants. What's your cutie mark like? Azure questioned Thornbred, looking back at the satchels on his hips. Oh, it's nothing special, just a notepad with a drawing on it. Nothing too crazy or colourful. Thornbred responded, looking back towards where his cutie mark would be under the trousers. All cutie marks are special, even if they aren't colourful or dazzling in design. You should be proud of it. Azure placed a hoof on Thornbred's shoulder in a reassuring gesture, smiling all the while. Who said I wasn't? I like it the way it is, alongside just so happens like a more formal styling. Thornbred playfully replied, looking at Azure. It also helps my little sister. She hasn't got hers yet, and I don't want her staring at mine all day and getting jealous or worried that she hasn't got one. How old is she? Still just a filly, constantly going on and on about all her friends are getting them, and that she doesn't want to wait. It hurts knowing I can't help her. Maybe I can speak to her. I know how she's feeling. I may not be able to get her a cutie mark, but I can ease the disappointment. It's the best thing to do to help a cutie markless pony. Thornbred nodded, opening his mouth to respond before he noticed that Azure suddenly stopped behind a red line on the floor. A large black door stood in front with text in its center reading, Subsection 7R. Here we are, Azure stated, body frozen and not daring to move an inch forward. I'm not allowed to go further due to the entire clearance thing. Anyone who does is often fired on the spot. Wouldn't want that to happen. No, of course not. Thornbred was interrupted, a loud clank being heard as the door swung open. 2 Pegasi in complete black jumpsuits and respirators walked out, a baton strapped to their back, lacking any sort of recognizable characteristic. They quickly moved to either side of the door, allowing a 3rd Pegasi to exit the room behind. This pony looked older, with a partly grey mane and tail with some wrinkles on his red fur, mainly focused around his eyes and mouth. He was wearing a researcher's coat. He dismissively waves a hoof. Thank you, Azure, for delivering our friend here to Subsection 7R. You can take an early break if you desire. Azure smiled towards Thornbred, nodding towards him as she turned around to go in the opposite direction. See you around then. I hope so. Thornbred responds alongside a wave, focusing on the lead pony in front of him after Azure begins to trot away. The lab pony in front speaks once more. The 2 masked ponies stay silent. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Thornbred. My name is Dr. Crowhop. I am the supervisor here in Subsection 7R. Please follow me. His words were calm, collected, and possibly even cold to some. That's professionalism for you. Like a synchronized unit, both Dr. Crowhop and the 2 masked guards turn around. Dr. Crowhop leads, followed by one of the guards, the other behind Thornbred, making the option not to follow seem like not so much of an option at all. He slowly trots forward, not getting too close to the pony in front. So, Mr. Thornbred, I have seen your research. Very impressive for a pony of your age. I'm glad you accepted this opportunity to work closely with the Weather Factory. He spoke with a flat and unchanging tone, with no energy, only authority in his voice. Of course, it's an honor to work in a place like this, especially in this part of the factory. Thornbred's wings began to twitch in excitement again. It was hard to keep a professional front and hide the excitement from his childhood dream finally coming true. Yes, it is a big honor to be allowed behind these doors at all. Speaking of which, let's get you signed in. You'll need an ID card if you're going to be working here. Thornbred's mouth opened slightly in shock. It all made sense, of course. ID cards allow the workers to access this part of the facility and all within it, but he never expected to get one. It was a dream come true, making his inner child jump with excitement. But alas, he kept his professional front. Yes, of course, what do I have to do? We need you to provide a picture and other formal details, nothing too out of the ordinary. Then you'll be free to roam around certain sections of the facility to do your job." "Which is what exactly? You haven't quite told me." Thornbred scowled lightly, confused at the way Dr. Crowhop was introducing him to the workplace. Normally the job was described before signing in. "You'll see." The registration process was quick, name and date of birth alongside a feather from Thornbred's wing. It was a strange requirement, but Crowhop insisted that it was just a form of identification for other staff and security, such as the two masked ponies by his side. Before long he was roaming in the halls of Subsection 7R. The long strips of colour lined the hallways, all indicating pathways to different parts of the facility. Different areas passed as Dr. Crowhop and the guards marched Thornbred towards an unknown destination. Raw material storage, Spectre production, Rainbow assembly, waste disposal. They all seemed relatively unremarkable, no special indicators or designs on the doors or walls around them. However, the smell emanating from the rooms was hardly pleasant, reminiscent of wet wood and leaves. Other ponies also walked past in the opposite direction, varying in age, gender, and attire. There seemed to be 3 attires that ponies appeared in. Ponies wearing white lab coats, goggles, masks, and gloves that are always stained with different colours of the rainbow. Thornbred could only assume that they were the ones who assembled the rainbow. Boiler suit ponies that carried toolboxes around their back. By the toolbox and the deep oily red stains all over their uniform, they were mechanics of some kind. It was a factory after all. But alas, they seemed far less common than the other ponies, only appearing once in a dozen. These were all something Thornbred had seen before, however. Mechanics and doctors were common enough in Manhattan, and even in Equestria or the nearby Ponyville. The third, however, was something that seemed to be restricted to Subsection 7R. These ponies wore all black, no determining details except for a string of numbers on the side of their jumpsuits. They wore a full facial mask that made it impossible to see their faces, alongside a hood that made it even more difficult to see their identity. The final detail of their strange attire was a device strapped to their side, complete black with metal prongs sticking out of one end. The closest Thornbred had ever seen to ponies like these were security ponies at events and meetings with royalty. It would make sense, as they were also the ones that Dr. Crowhop had following behind him, but they seemed to do a lot around 7R, pushing carts full of trash bags into the waste disposal section and pulling carts into the raw material section. Their anonymity made them seem almost unpony-like, like robots with no personality or identity. His thoughts were interrupted as he gently bumped into the back of the guard in front. Dr. Crowhop had stopped in front of a door labelled Meeting Room 4. "Come, Mr. Thornbred, let's discuss what task you're going to be doing here in Subsection 7R. Thornbred nodded, walking into the room and sitting down on one of the few chairs around a small table. A small pile of papers already on its surface. Dr. Crowhop and the guards followed afterwards, closing the door behind them. "So, Mr. Thornbred, what do you already know about Subsection 7R? Crowhop questioned, locking eyes with Thornbred. "I know that it's where rainbows are produced, and I've also heard that there's a small phenomenon within the ponies that work here, called FSD? His voice shook as he spoke. Dr. Crowhop's stare bore into his brain like a nail. He couldn't help but feel nervous. "Yes, FSD is what the workers around here call it. It has always been an issue here due to the stressful nature of our work, but recently rates have begun to rise. Originally, we only had to replace 1 or 2 employees every dozen moons, but now we're going through 7 to 8 per moon." Crowhop finally broke his one-sided staring contest with Thornbred to look down at the stack of papers, handing them over to Thornbred. "We called you here to find out a way of reducing, possibly even stopping, the development of this FSD, if it even exists at all." Thornbred looked down at the paper. It was the start of a lengthy contract of the terms and conditions of his work in the factory, a long list of points stating what he could and couldn't do, and lots of other legal jargon, all ending with a request for a signature. "Whilst you do your research, we will provide accommodation within the factory workers' living quarters, alongside food and water. You will also receive payment upon completion of your task. All you have to do is sign it." Normally, Thornbred would read through the entirety of these kinds of documents. There were plenty of stories from across Equestria about how these can go wrong if you don't read them. but the stares at Dr. Crowhop and the mere presence of the two guards made this situation feel urgent, as if there was no time to think about the decision. His eyes skimmed over the several pages of words before finally landing on the signature line. It was now or never. He pulled a pen from his bag with his teeth and scribbled his signature down just above the line, quickly sliding it back towards Dr. Crowhop. "Good. I'm glad to have you assist us with this issue, Mr. Thornbred. 40 will lead you to your room where you can begin your research." Dr. Crowhop stood up and walked towards the door, not even looking back at Thornbred as he spoke to him. One of the guards opened the door, allowing him to leave. The other guard trotted to Thornbred's side, awaiting him to follow. The stitching on the side of the uniform indicated that this was the number 40 that Crowhop mentioned. There was very little reason to stay in this room after Dr. Crowhop's departure, so Thornbred followed after 40 towards his quarters, where he would likely be staying for a few moons while doing his research. The question, of course, was where to start. It had been 3 days since Thornbred's assignment had been presented to him: prove the existence of FSD, and, if true, find a way to lower the rates of development. It was hard to even begin to understand the phenomenon. Even with his newfound clearance, it was clear that some things were being hidden from him. Certain rooms and areas remained locked off. Instead, he had to try and draw this information out of the other Pegasus around. What better way to do this than conducting interviews? He went around the facility, asking any pony who wasn't speed walking towards another sector, as they often were, to tell him about their experiences with FSD. A diverse range of participants in the interview had to be maintained for the results to be valid: different genders, ages, and classes. Otherwise, he could hardly trust the result. He spoke to scientists, workers, and guards alike, combining any information about the development of FSD and the nature of their work, which was often met with stern silence after a glance at Thornbred's ID. The former question, however, yielded some results. He found out that most ponies that developed FSD were often guards or scientists, especially those involved with the creation of the components of rainbows, or spectra. Spectra was the main resource used in the production of rainbows, with 3 different qualities being produced: A, B, and C class spectra. A was reserved for special events and shows, such as the Equestria Games. It was the best quality that the Weather Factory could produce, more vibrant and colourful than anything ever seen before. B was for everyday use. It served its purpose, still colourful and bright, but not as much as A class. C was the worst quality that could still be processed, often being turned into paints used by artists all over Equestria. They were too thick and sludge-like for rainbows, but perfect for artistic endeavours. One thing remained a mystery: the components that led to the creation of spectra. Very little information could be obtained from the scientist ponies about it, possibly a line or 2 at a time. The raw material has a magical property that allows it to produce vibrant hues. However, some samples are better than others, with only one pony in the facility being able to grade their quality quickly and reliably. This was all interesting to Thornbred, even if it wasn't exactly relevant to his research. But there is never a thing as too much information. It's not like he had any other leads on where to take the study next. All he had learnt is that FSD is most common within those who work with the raw components of spectra, specifically guards and scientists, and that it often takes no more than 6 moons to fully develop to the point where the worker has to be replaced. All felt like a dead end with no other direction to go until an interview with one of the guards, Guard 91, and an equally generic and unidentifiable guard pony as the participants in Thornbred's previous interviews. "Hello, I'm Mr. Thornbred, a researcher hired to gain insight and possibly reduce the FSD phenomenon within Subsection 7R, Thornbred stated, holding a clipboard in his wing alongside having a pencil hanging out the side of his mouth. "I'm 91. Guard here in Subsection 7R. I've been for 3 moons or so." Their tone was dull and continuous, no emotion or difference from the other guards. They sat completely still, only moving during the speech. Their mask and hood remained on. "Yes," Thornbred continued. "How many peers or co-workers have you seen display symptoms of FSD, including low mood, lack of socialization, lack of..." "Plenty," the pony butted in, no consideration for the words of Thornbred. "It's just something that happens to all of us over time. Stressful work will do that to you." They pause, slowly tilting their head down towards the floor. Well, to most of us. There are exceptions. Thornbred's ears stood up, and his wings shuffled around. No pony had ever mentioned anything beyond the gloomy deterministic outlook of, it happens to everyone eventually in here. An exception to the rule sounded like the lead he needed in his research. Not only could they provide a different perspective on FSD, but they may also understand a way to prevent it from occurring. He had to know more. Exceptions? Well, I should say an exception. There is only one that I know of. Guard number 12 has been working here longer than any pony else, and hasn't changed a bit. And where would I find Guard 12? Do you know? That's the thing. I rarely see them. They're always running from place to place with carts of resources, quicker than any other pony around here could, even if they were flying. I see. Thornbred looked down at his notes from the interview. Guard 91 shows similar views to their peers, believing that the development of FSD is inevitable and a certainty for anyone who works in Subsection 7R. Guard 12, however, seems to be an exception to this. They have long outlasted the gestation period of the phenomenon of 6 moons, apparently being here long before Guard 91, with little to no change. It was an awkward period of silence between the two ponies, with Thornbred pondering how to find Guard 12, and 91 wanting to return to his break. Best bet is probably waiting in the main factory cafeteria. We have our own here in 7R, but I've seen Guard 12 hanging out there sometimes. They'll stand out. Probably the only pony I've seen wear a gas mask for that long. Thornbred tilted his head in confusion. The main attribute of guard ponies is the inability to distinguish them from each other, aside from their numbers. Why would 12 be the only one to be different? Could it have something to do with their avoidance of FSD? Perhaps it was some sort of chemical used in production that was causing it. It was all too early to assume, but one thing was for certain, an interview with 12 was a necessity. I will have to try and find Guard 12. Thank you for your time and information, 91. You are free to leave. Thornbred spoke, slipping his clipboard and pen into the now empty saddlebags. He'd placed their contents into his room. He stood up and trotted out towards the exit of 7R to find the staff canteen. It was nice to leave the secretive 7R from time to time. The constant noise and bustling around in its corridors proved tiring and monotonous. It was time for a change of scenery. The more general areas of the factory were much more pleasant and open than the corridors of Subsection 7R. The ponies were much friendlier too, waving their hooves and smiling at Thornbred as he walked past. It was a contrast between the cold stares of the scientists and the lifeless faces of the guards in 7R. It didn't take long for Thornbred to find the canteen. The smell of apple fritters and other delicious treats and food items filled the air. They were all provided by a business in Manhattan for the factory. The canteen was full of worker ponies, all sitting down and enjoying their lunchtime meals. Thornbred intentionally timed his visit around lunch to have the highest chance of meeting the elusive Guard 12. They didn't expect to hear a voice call his name. Yo, Thornbred! His head spun around. The voice sounded familiar. He saw a blue hoof waving in the air. It was Azure, the pony that first met him when coming to the factory. Thornbred smiled and waved back at the familiar face, trotting over and taking a seat in front of them. Azure, good to see you again after our first meeting was cut short. By celestial ears, I thought I recognized you from across the room. Kinda hard not to thanks to the entire pants thing. Azure pointed towards Thornbred's clothing. I'll change my clothing style when you stop having a blue coat, Thornbred responded playfully, leaning on the short table in front of them. Are you here to have something to eat? Plenty of cakes and apple pies to go around. Not exactly. We get our food in 7R. But you just gotta try these. Azure holds up a piece of apple pie. They're the new ones from up north. They are amazing. Azure cuts a piece of the pie and hands it over to Thornbred. That's kind of you, Azure. Thornbred smiles, taking a piece of the pie and eating it. All the apple products were always made by the Apple family. They were the best at what they did and had been for as long as any pony could remember. Seeing them have a competitor was something that no one would ever expect. Many had tried, like the Flim Flam brothers, but none had rivaled the Apple family's quality. But I'm not just here for some food. I'm here looking for someone right now. Thornbred smiles dimly, looking around the room. Oh, Who? I come here pretty much every lunch break. I've probably seen them around once or twice. Azure confidently stated, leaning in while leaning her elbows on the table. It's a pony dressed in all black, wears a gas mask, has 12 stitched onto their side. Everything seemed to go silent, almost as if the entire lunch hall had heard Thornbred's mission. Of course, this wasn't the case. Most ponies were minding their business and talking among themselves, but the silent stare from Azure made it feel that way at least. I think I know who you're talking about. They come here every once in a while, just watching us all eat or talk. Then they leave. Azure leans in, decreasing the volume of her voice into a whisper. Some say that they're listening to us, making sure we don't say something we shouldn't. Thornbred smiles, shaking his head in a dismissive yet playful way. It's just a rumor. Have any of you actually ever talked to them? Well, no. Azure looks down, rubbing the back of her head with her hoof. Well, maybe you ought to try. Who knows, you may be surprised. Thornbred begins looking around the room, scanning for the mysterious Guard 12 that he was told about. Azure also begins to look around, waving to peers that walk past, all of whom she seems to be on friendly terms with. So, Azure looks back at Thornbred. Why do you want to talk to them so bad? Isn't there anyone else who can help? Well, I'm not sure how much I can tell you, but they may have the key to stopping the entire FSD situation. I've already asked every pony I can in 7R with little success. No one wants to speak about anything at all. Thornbred sighs with frustration. Of course, he knew it was going to be difficult, but never to this extreme. Yeah, all the ponies in there are like that. I heard from one of my friends that they have some unicorns in there that produce rainbows. They hide it to keep their pride or something. Azure begins to eat the remains of her apple pie that she offered to Thornbred, concentrating less on looking around for Guard 12. I don't know. They won't tell me how to make rainbows, or how to do anything for that matter. Thornbred was interrupted by a loud clank next to him. The entire room was silent this time, all the ponies looking towards him and Azure. He looked towards the sound, and is met with the silent stare of Guard 12. He could tell from the gas mask alone, but it was confirmed through the subtle tilt of the head to stare at their side. Yep, there was the embroidered 12 in their jumpsuit. Number 12 doesn't move, keeping still as if Celestia had turned into stone herself. The air remained still. Thornbred swore he could even hear his heartbeat thumping in his chest. What did number 12 want? Was he supposed to speak, apologize, shake their hoof, or was he simply supposed to do nothing? He didn't know how to interact with this elusive figure. Hello? Thornbred stuttered out, putting a smile, albeit fake, on his face to appear friendly and non-confrontational to Guard 12. I'm Mr. Thornbred, researcher assigned to Subsection 7R. I know who you are. Follow me. Their voice was muffled due to the heavy-duty gas mask, but Thornbred could tell it was very similarly dull and had a slightly lower pitch than most. Guard 12 began to walk towards the corridor that led to Subsection 7R. Thornbred didn't dare not to follow any guard's orders due to their obvious power over workers in the factory. He looked behind him towards Azure, who gave a solemn smile and a small wave. It was the last thing Thornbred saw before rounding a corner, leaving him alone with Guard 12. Guard 12 led Thornbred around corner after corner, deeper and deeper into the belly of Subsection 7R, many places that Thornbred had never seen before. At least he thought he hadn't. All the corridors look almost identical, giving a sense of familiarity, yet still strangely foreign. But through the calculated and almost robotic movements of Guard 12, he could tell that this was a familiar routine. It took several minutes of walking that was constantly paired with the harsh clops from Guard 12's hooves against the concrete floor. It was almost like water torture to Thornbred, the sudden change from the complete silence of Subsection 7R to the repetitive clopping drilling into his skull. Luckily, it didn't last for much longer, as Guard 12 darted into his side room, causing Thornbred to stumble over his own hooves before following suit. The hoofsteps stopped, with the complete black outfit fading into the darkness, making the guard invisible when compared to the environment around them. An unfamiliar and unpleasant smell hung in the air, causing a slight sense of dread to wash over Thornbred. I'm sorry to ask, but could you perhaps turn on the light? A few clops could be heard, before falling silent again. After a few bursts of light from the old fluorescent bulb on the ceiling, the room was lit with the same harsh white light that was common within the factory. The room itself was standard in shape and size for the worker accommodation, but the appearance was different. Instead of the usual whitewashed walls, there were varying sizes of splotches of all different colours coating the walls, with photos of a large variety of Pegasi pinned within them. None of them familiar to Thornbred. None of them were residents of Cloudsdale nor workers in the factory, but they were mainly all foals.
Welcome to my room. Quite a distance from the others, you can see.
Guard 12 croaked out, taking a seat on the floor in front of the main wall of photos. Thornbred stood in silence. He didn't expect to be led to their living quarters so soon. In all honesty, he never expected to see their living area. He never requested such from the other workers, as it was unlikely to provide any sort of useful information. This was a first. "It's very interesting, lots of pictures and colours I see." Thornbred slowly walks over to the wall behind Guard 12, taking a much closer look at the photos. Most are from unusual angles, with the pony rarely looking towards the camera.
It's a hobby of mine. I was an artist before working here.
Guard 12 states, trotting over to a set of paintbrushes and paper on top of their desk, alongside half a dozen more photographs. "I see. Is that related to the wall pattern too?"
Each pony is placed in front of their hue. It helps me when I end up using them for painting.
Talking with Guard 12 was an experience. They were the most individualistic member of staff within 7R so far, with a pastime and a hobby unrelated to their work that others seemed to lack. Perhaps it could be linked to their avoidance of FSD. "That sounds fun. I was never into painting myself, but I can always appreciate the effort. Do you have any finished work?"
No.
Guard 12 refrained from elaborating further, creating an icy silence that sent a chill down Thornbred's spine. "Oh." Thornbred stood, waiting to see if Guard 12 would continue before continuing himself. "Well, what made you come here to work in the weather factory? It's quite a change from career, if you don't mind me saying." Guard 12 slowly glares at Thornbred from behind their tinted gas mask, making it seem as if the topic was still raw to them, but alas, they continued.
I got offered a place after the owners of the factory saw my work. No clue how they saw it. I wasn't popular by any means.
They shuffle around in their papers, pulling out an envelope brown by age. "I see. Was this some sort of commissionary work? Why did they want you?" Thornbred continued.
Quality control.
"Quality control?"
Rainbows. I checked the components of rainbows.
Thornbred tilts his head, making a small gasp. He had heard of a pony from the other employees of 7R. He expected a scientist pony. Seeing a guard in their place was definitely a surprise. "Spectre, correct? I heard about it, but I couldn't find much. I doubt that you would give me any more information?" Thornbred slowly trotted closer to Guard 12, trying to glance at their desk. Guard 12 suddenly twists to face Thornbred, stepping towards them aggressively, trying to ward them away from the desk of photos and documents.
No.
And with that, they quickly turn back towards the furniture of the room, focusing specifically on a closet and digging through it. "I suppose it was worth a shot. Do you have any other duties within the factory? You seem to leave 7R much more than the others." Thornbred stays in place, worried that Guard 12's erratic movements could be based on annoyance and aggression. Better safe than sorry.
Transport.
Guard 12 pulls out a large metal case with a lock on the front. It wasn't locked, but the lock hung on the latch with a strange aura of power and authority. "I've seen other guards moving assets around when not protecting the scientists or engineers. Is that what you were referring to?"
Somewhat. The other guards do it in groups. I can do it alone because I'm stronger.
"You do look bigger than most Pegasi here." Thornbred nods in agreement, speaking his internal monologue out loud. Guard 12 stops, placing the case down in front of Thornbred before sitting down behind it, maintaining eye contact with the researcher. Thornbred stares at Guard 12, before making a small gasp, losing all sense of the professional attitude he managed to hold on to for the previous part of the conversation. Not in a bad way. I'm sorry if I upset you."
I'm not a Pegasi.
It's hard to say that it didn't take him by surprise. Only Pegasi can walk in Cloudsdale, unless accompanied by a unicorn or an alicorn. But Guard 12 didn't seem to be a unicorn either, with no horn poking through the top of their mask.
I am not a Pegasi.
Then, Guard 12 nods, pulling the baton off their back and dropping it on the floor next to them to highlight the lack of wings on their suit. But how? Thoughts raced through Thornbred's mind. The first question that needed to be answered was exactly how an Earth pony could live within Cloudsdale. It was not something that any pony had done, as far as Thornbred was aware. Then other thoughts entered his mind. What if the race of ponies had something to do with their apparent resistance to FSD? It was hard to say without further research, but it was the first big lead.
How what? It's not hard to understand.
Guard 12 grunts, taking a sarcastic stance in their speech, or at least much more than usual. You're an Earth pony. You can't walk on clouds unless accompanied by a unicorn and alicorn, and since I haven't seen anything but Pegasi since I got here, I don't think that's what's going on. Thornbred raises a hoof in a half shrug, gesturing his confusion and intrigue into this matter. Guard 12 emits a sigh. They swiftly pick up the case and place it on their back before hastily trotting towards the exit. Thornbred quickly stands, going to follow the guard. Where are you going? I still have lots of questions to ask you, if you don't mind, that is.
Work. Collecting the newest samples of spectra.
Could I join you, perhaps? He asks hopefully, wanting to understand more of what the Pegasi, or in this case Earth ponies, do for their work. Guard 12 doesn't respond, just walking outside of the door. Thornbred interpreted this as a sign that following behind the guard wasn't allowed. He slows down, taking one last look around the room before readying himself for the trip back, alongside the write-up of his informal interview with Guard 12. This was quickly proven wrong, however, with Guard 12 stopping and looking back at Thornbred over the case on their back, waiting for him to follow. Guard 12 led Thornbred down a winding maze of hallways once again, but this time he wasn't lost. This place was recognizable to Thornbred as the place Dr. Crowhop first met him in. He remembered the markers on the wall: raw materials, spectra production, rainbow assembly, waste disposal, and by the looks of it, he was being led to spectra production. Thornbred expected spectra production to be a large network of rooms and labs where ponies scurried around making the mysterious components of a rainbow. It would make sense after all. Guard 12 stopped, unlocked the door with their keycard and walked forward into the darkness. Thornbred followed, hesitant and almost nervous about exactly what had been hidden from him behind these doors. The inside of the room was dimly lit with a couple of light bulbs hanging from its ceiling. They provided enough light to see roughly what was going on, but not enough for a detailed inspection. Inside the room was surprisingly empty, no lab equipment of any kind. Instead, Thornbred was faced with a large metallic room with a singular machine at the end. The machine itself was hard to describe, with its construction shrouded in darkness. All Thornbred could tell was that the machine was a large rusted box with a funnel on the top, belts and cogs covering the surface of its walls. It was apparent that most of this would be covered during normal operation, but currently the machine must have been under maintenance, with several mechanics scrambling all over it with their toolboxes. Next to the machine were 7 tanks, full to the brim and glowing brightly with the colours of the rainbow. All of them were connected to the machine with clear hoses. Thornbred followed Guard 12 as best he could, which wasn't easy due to the low lighting conditions and the complete black outfit of the guards themselves. I assume that's the machine that makes spectra. His words echoed off the cold and bare walls of the room.
Yes, it's currently inactive. The room needs to be cleaned periodically, alongside the machine itself.
As they got closer and closer to the machine, Thornbred began to notice that there were other guards in this room too. All of them had mops, buckets and brooms with which they were cleaning away, cleaning any fluid and picking up any pieces of trash that lay around, with a smell of disinfectant filling the air. It was an improvement from what he had smelt when walking past his room with Dr. Crowhop. Thornbred could tell they hadn't fully cleaned the floor yet, however, as every other hoof step was met with squelching of oil-soaked rags or crunching of some unknown substance. No different to walking the streets of Manhattan, in all honesty. I see. And with that, They reach the machine and the oil-stained mechanics. Guard 12 wanders towards the towering vats of spectra, taking samples from each one. The machine looked even more complicated up close, probably containing thousands of moving parts. All of these had to work to allow for rainbows to be seen across Equestria. Thornbred had no chance of ever understanding the machine alone, but luckily, some ponies could help. Thornbred approached one mechanic close to the base of the machine. Due to the low light conditions, Thornbred couldn't make out much about the pony at all. Everyone looked grey in the darkness. "Hello there, do you mind if I speak to you quickly? I have a few questions to ask." The mechanic looks down, almost confused at the attempted interaction with the pony below. It was fair to say that being social in this job was rarer than Thornbred originally predicted. However, the mechanics slowed their wing flaps, lowering themselves to the floor with a quiet clank from their hooves on the metal flooring. Yes. Now that they were closer to Thornbred, he could see the thick oil stains scattered across their jumpsuit, but still not the colour of the pony. "My name is Thornbred. I'm doing a bit of research on the Pegasi that work here, and I was interested in this machine that you're working on." Thornbred gestured a wing towards the machine, being careful to avoid directly touching it for the fear of breaking its intricate workings. The mechanic freezes, jerking their head left and right before settling their gaze back to Thornbred. "Well, it's called the PEGASUS. It creates spectra from raw materials." "I see. It looks very complicated. Does it require much maintenance?" It's complicated. Lots of gears and moving parts that easily get gunked up. Lots of cleaning and taking out the waste products." The engineer rubs off the oil from their hooves onto their jumpsuit, displaying the amount of dirt that builds up within the machine. Thornbred falls silent as a question creeps into his mind, a question that he was unlikely to get an answer to. But these mechanic Pegasi were more relaxed than any other staff members, so it was worth a try. He leant in, reducing his voice to a whisper to try and prevent any guards from hearing him request this forbidden information. "What exactly is the raw material for spectra? I hear a lot about how it's made, but not much what it's made of." The mechanic goes wide-eyed, their mouth dropping open slightly in shock. It was obvious that this was a question that wasn't asked much by those working in the factory. The look fades quickly, however. They reach into a pocket on their chest, pulling out a small piece of paper before quickly writing something down on it with a pen and handing it to Thornbred. He didn't expect an answer, but he also didn't expect to be provided with an object either. He took the note and quickly placed it into his breast pocket. The mechanic flaps their wings, quickly rising into the air and shooting off towards the top of the machine. Thornbred smiles. It wasn't a straightforward response, but it was a response other than a scowl. His wings twitched with excitement at the opportunity of finally understanding the inner workings of the spectra production facility. He looked around for Guard 12, not wanting to leave without them for fear of getting lost in the facility. They were at the violet vat of spectra, pouring a small sample of the almost goopish liquid into a vial and placing it into their case before walking towards the exit. Thornbred trotted over, a new sense of enthusiasm around his job. He needed to return to his room as soon as possible to write down his findings, alongside finding out exactly what the piece of paper from the mechanic was. Thornbred had stayed up later into the night, finishing writing up the interview at Guard 12. This would have been usually a simple task, but the constant groans and clanks of machinery made it difficult to concentrate. He awoke to the sound of hoof steps nearing his door, then leaving after a couple of seconds. Confused, he looked towards his door to find a small envelope slid under the gap in the frame. He stumbled out of bed, picking up the envelope and opening it. It was Dr. Growhop requesting that Thornbred meet him in his office at 2 p.m. for an update on his studies on FSD. This made Thornbred groan slightly. He loved studying ponies and behaviours, but hated the review of his findings. However, it had to be done. He checked the clock on the wall, 11 a.m. At least he had time to get something to eat before the meeting. He trotted out of his room after lazily throwing on his standard grey pants and white shirt, making his way to the main factory canteen. It was rather quiet. He assumed that lunchtime fell later on in the day. This was hardly a bad thing, however. The lack of sleep had caused a minor headache, and the last thing Thornbred wanted was to interact with other ponies. He grabbed a tray and gathered something for a late breakfast, apples, some hay, and a coffee, and sat down at a nearby table. He could have taken the items back to his room within Subsection 7R, but after last night, Thornbred wanted to take a break from the intimidating environment of the Rainbow Department. He slowly ate his food and sipped at his drink, intentionally doing so to delay his return to Subsection 7R. This was until he saw a familiar face entering the room. Azure. Azure looked preppy as usual, wearing their uniform with the same pride she always did. She quickly noticed Thornbred and rushed over with her food to accompany him throughout their breaks. "Wow, late night, huh? You look a mess." Thornbred sighed, placing his cup down on the table with a grunt. "Yeah, lots of work to do. I don't know how you factory ponies manage to keep so energetic." "Well, when you love your job, it's kind of hard not to be excited." Azure spoke whilst biting into an apple pie once more. Thornbred mentally noted that it must be one of her favourites. "Yeah, I guess so. What department do you work in, Azure?" "The cloud department. My speciality is working on creating the lightning clouds that are used during storms. It's kinda dangerous, but it needs to be done." "That's cool. I always did wonder how they put electricity into the clouds. Think you could tell me?" Under one condition." Azure stops eating and leans forward, a wide grin on her face. Thornbred pauses before speaking. Those kinds of smiles were never good news, and always shot a shiver of anxiety up Thornbred's spine. However, Azure was one of the nicest ponies he'd met in the factory, so what was the harm in complying? "Sure, what is it?" "Tell me how rainbows are made. You must know after spending a few days in 7R, unlike last time, right?" Thornbred was taken back by the request, mirroring the reaction he'd been faced with so many times by his peers in the facility. He wasn't sure how much he could tell Azure without getting in trouble, if he could even answer the question at all. "Well..." Thornbred hesitates, debating what to say in response. I don't know really. All I know is that it's made out of pigment called spectra." "And what's that?" "I don't know. I know it's made with a machine, but other than that, it's a complete mystery." "Well, if it was easy, I doubt they'd have so many ponies working on it all the time." Azure finishes her apple pie, gently wiping some of the debris off her snout with a hoof before sipping at her drink. "And it wouldn't be so protected. I've seen more guards in that facility than I've seen in my life. Not even royalty have that kind of protection." Thornbred finishes off his coffee at this point, and therefore his entire meal. However, he doesn't leave, preferring to stay a while to continue the conversation. He had time to spare. Azure nods in agreement. "Putting electricity in clouds is a lot easier. We push these clouds in between two prongs and flip a switch. The dangerous part is not getting shocked by it whilst taking it to storage." "I'd imagine so. I remember hearing about the Wonderbolt's performance where that happened to one of their flyers. I think it might have been Rainbow Dash, one of the first performances she was in." Thornbred was unsure of this information. Since he hadn't been in Cloudsdale and the surrounding area for a few years, all the information he knew about events in that time frame were from word of mouth. He hoped that the information he was told was correct. Getting it wrong would be embarrassing. "Oh yeah, I remember that. She crashed right in front of the stand. Everyone was surprised she wasn't kicked out of the Wonderbolts entirely." "I guess being one of the elements of harmony helped with that." Thornbred chuckled at the slightly passive-aggressive comment. Even though the members of the Elements of Harmony didn't like to admit it, their status came with some perks. "Say, isn't she involved in the Weather Factory too? She was some sort of ambassador for the place. Kind of expected to see her around." Thornbred mumbled disappointedly. He was never one to be impressed by the presence of famous ponies, but it's hard to deny that he did want to see one of the Elements of Harmony. "Yeah, she used to be around a lot. She used to talk at meetings, give tours of the factory, help assist with weather control before big events, you name it." Azure's expression shifts from her usual smile to a slightly uneasy frown. "At least a year or so ago. No one really knows what happened. She just disappeared in 7R, never to be seen again. There were so many rumours as to why. One even said it's because Pinkie Pie forgot her birthday." Azure cracks a small smile, before returning to her blank expression. "But no one really knows. I haven't seen her in 7R either, and I've talked to everybody I could find there. Maybe she doesn't work in the Weather Factory anymore?" "She's probably just recovering from what happened to Scootaloo." The two fell silent. Scootaloo was like a sister to Rainbow Dash, going on adventures just like Applebloom and Sweetbelle did with Applejack and Rarity. Seeing her be sent away after failing her flight exam must have been heartbreaking, especially since Rainbow Dash had tried as hard as she could to ensure that she would pass. Thornbred knew that if he lost his sister, that he'd probably end up doing the same thing. "Well," Thornbred sighed, standing and stepping back from the table. "Dr. Crowhop will be expecting me soon. I'd best get going. It was nice speaking to you again, Azure. Alright, see you tomorrow, right? You have to tell me about how it goes. Azure says with once again returning smile, one that Thornbred couldn't help but reciprocate. He could almost consider Azure as a friend with how much they talked in the past few days. Thornbred nods. Yeah, see you tomorrow, Azure. And with that, he trotted off back towards Subsection 7R. His mind began to switch from the friendly and informal tone of conversation with Azure to the more professional front that he would have to present to Dr. Crowhop. His research had provided some correlations with FSD, but no hard evidence. This made it difficult to think about what exactly he could discuss with certainty. After returning to his room to gather his research, Thornbred headed towards Crowhop's office. Dr. Crowhop wasn't exactly a friendly pony. He carried an intimidating aura that could probably strike fear into Princess Celestia herself. He didn't have the option not to speak with him. It was his job, his purpose, his special talent. It's what he was here to do. The door to his office loomed at the end of the corridor. No pony going in or out. Thornbred held his breath as he stopped and held up a hoof. The corridor went silent for a moment until Thornbred heard a chair scrape across the floor and hoof steps approaching from the other side of the door. It slid open. Dr. Crowhop was smiling on the other side. Why, hello there, Thornbred. Pleasure to be meeting you once again. Please come in. I hope you have brought good news. He turns around, leading Thornbred into his office. It, similar to Dr. Crowhop, was sterile and cold, composed of mainly dull blues and greys with little other colours in sight. Well, Thornbred already began to dig through his bag, pulling out all the papers and notes that he'd written over the countless interviews and observations since he had first started. It seemed like a lot to the untrained eye, but in fact, it concluded little. He placed them in a pile on Crowhop's desk. I found that the average time it takes for a worker to develop FSD is around 6 moons. All except one. Dr. Crowhop, now sitting comfortably on his chair behind his desk, leans forward, placing his hooves on the desk, skimming over some of the reports that Thornbred had provided. And who may that be? Guard 12. From accounts of the other guards, they have worked here longer than any other pony has. Thornbred slowly hands over the written interview of the guard who brought up Guard 12, Guard 91. So, I went and interviewed them, trying to find out exactly why they weren't developing symptoms of FSD. Perhaps something to do with their jobs specifically, or their upbringing. Thornbred once again produces the interview transcripts from his bag, placing them on Dr. Crowhop's desk. It led me to an unexpected discovery, one that may hold the information we need. Guard 12 is an Earth pony. It's only hypothesis at this stage, but it's the only possible way forward.
That's enough, Thornbred.
Dr. Crowhop growls out. It was a change from his previous demeanour. He was never really friendly in conversation, but he had never been aggressive either. He stands, walking out from behind his desk. Thornbred was taken aback, a sense of confusion over the sudden change of attitude. He had done what was asked of him, hadn't he? But this may be a potential answer to factors involved in the development of Factory Stress Desaturation.
How important secrecy is to a facility such as ours, correct?
Yeah, but I think this is really
understand
important.
How important the weather factory is to Cloudsdale, how important it is to our city?
Thornbred nods, slowly walking backwards as Dr. Crowhop approaches him.
Then I assume you understand how detrimental it would be if every pony in question knew that Pegasi weren't solely responsible for the weather. If ponies knew that Earth ponies were involved, Cloudsdale would lose its respect, possibly even its sole responsibility of making the weather. As Cloudsdale residents, I don't think we would want our most important facility to be given away to the unicorns or Earth ponies, would we?
Dr. Crowhop ended up standing right in front of Thornbred, backing him into a corner like a predator trapping its prey. Thornbred couldn't help but fall into the role, fear spreading across his body as Crowhop drew closer. No, of course not, Thornbred squeaked out, his voice wobbling with fear. Dr. Crowhop flares his wings, snarling as he continues to spit his commands towards Thornbred. If you tell any pony about this, then I assure your time here will be short. Factories are dangerous places, especially Subsection 7R. Accidents are preventable, but not impossible. Thornbred stays silent. He is frozen in fear from the stern glare of his superior. It felt like being told off by a teacher when he was just a colt. Only this time, the situation was more than just accidentally hitting another student with his wings. I will allow you to continue your interviews with Guard 12, under the condition that not once do you refer to them as an Earth pony in your documentation. Do I make myself clear?
Crowhop leans forward, locking eyes with Thornbred to ensure that he can't look away. Thornbred slowly nodded. He couldn't lie in this situation even if he wanted to. Those dull eyes staring at him looked deep into his mind, discovering all his deepest secrets and fears. As quickly as this all happened, it was over. Dr. Crowhop closes his wings and trots back to his desk, a more friendly demeanour returning. Good. I request Guard 12 to be relieved of their duties for as long as your research may require. Is there anything else you would like to say or request? There was lots of things Thornbred wanted to request. It was hardly paper and pens or other physical items, but information. The one thing he lacked in this place. Although many of the questions weren't essential to his research, it was hard to quench his inquisitive mind. It took a moment of recovery from the prior interaction with Crowhop, but he managed to mutter out one question, completely knowing that it was unlikely he would get an answer. What happened to Rainbow Dash? Dr. Crowhop scoffs, a smirk on his face as he leans forward. Intellects such as ourselves can hardly be focused on meeting celebrities. Your job is much more important than that. Thornbred rolls his eyes in annoyance. While it was true that most ponies wanted to meet an element of harmony, that wasn't the goal of his question. Rainbow Dash has been an ambassador of the Weather Factory for a long time. If any pony would have a good understanding of the development and timeline of Factory Stress Desaturation, it would be her. That's if her disappearance isn't due to the condition itself. Dr. Crowhop's smirk falls away, leaving him with that same mildly threatening look. Thornbred knew he was pushing his luck slightly. It wasn't asking about how rainbows were made, sure, but it was clearly another one of those topics that very few are willing to research into. I assure you Rainbow Dash is doing just fine. She works in management for the entire factory, alongside 7R itself. I know you are not in such a position, but you understand how much time that must take. I could not get her to come and talk to you, even if I believed it would be influential in your research. Thornbred nods. It was more in-depth than he expected, being used to one-word responses or cold shoulders from the other workers, but it was still vague, only revealing that Rainbow Dash was still alive, and maybe that wasn't true either. If that is all, you can leave and return to your room to prepare your interview with Guard 12. It will likely take place tomorrow. Dr. Crowhop looks down at the desk, taking the notes that Thornbred provided them and sorting them into two piles, one considerably smaller than the other. He slid the larger pile back towards Thornbred's side of the desk. Thornbred collected the notes, returning them to his saddlebags. The notes, whilst time-consuming, weren't the only copies of his research. If Dr. Crowhop wanted to keep some for himself, he could, just meant that Thornbred would have to rewrite some sections. Thornbred turns to the door, walking up to it and pulling it open with his wing. Just as he is about to leave, Crowhop speaks up once more. Also, Thornbred, keep interactions with the lower-level staff to a minimum. We do not want to risk a breach in secrecy. Thornbred looks back, once again confused by the situation around him. Some of the guards must have told Dr. Crowhop about his semi-frequent conversations with Azure. Maybe he'd said too much. He was unsure. All he could do was nod and continue to walk back to his room, worried but relieved that the meeting with Dr. Crowhop was over. Now to prepare for tomorrow. The night was quiet as one can be in a factory. Thornbred had grown accustomed to the constant humming and groaning of the machinery in the distance. It became background noise, something that could be filtered out with ease. The rhythmic clanking even became slightly comforting. The day started like any other. Wake up, get dressed. As Thornbred put on his shirt, the piece of paper from the mechanic fell out. He'd forgotten to read it, as it had been overshadowed by writing up his research. He uncrumpled it, wings twitching in excitement at another potential lead for his research. It was a ripped piece of a blueprint of some kind, measurements and calculations written in fine black ink over drawings of cogs and cylinders of all shapes and sizes. It was far too complicated for Thornbred to understand, but luckily he didn't have to. All he had to understand was the words written on the back. Meet me in supply closet 4. Thornbred sighed. He hoped that the mechanic didn't mean that to be a certain time, otherwise he would have certainly missed it. Luckily, it wouldn't be too difficult to check after his interview with Guard 12. He dropped the note into his bag and continued to dress himself, before heading out to interview Guard 12, forgetting to stop at the canteen for any sort of breakfast. It took a while to find Guard 12's room. He roughly remembered the way there from the last time he'd visited,
but the constant grey corridors made navigation difficult at times. He couldn't help but also notice the increased number of guards going back and forth between rooms, pushing trolleys with an arrangement of items on them. Sometimes it was crates labelled as Spectre paint, containers of the raw Spectre itself, or simply black bins with waste written on the side. Whatever the waste product was, it certainly smelt terrible. He eventually made it to Guard 12's room. He raised a hoof, freezing for a second in order to prepare himself for this strange and unusual method of conversation that Guard 12 uses. The door soon opened. Guard 12 was standing behind it with the same black jumpsuit that they were wearing previously. The only difference this time, however, was the fact that there were small specks of colour scattered across it. Alongside this, they retained their gas mask, not taking it off despite being off duty. Hello again. I'm assuming Dr. Grohop told you that I'd be returning to conduct another interview with you? Hopefully more formal this time. Thornbred smiled, hoping that a friendly approach would make Guard 12 more open to talking than previously. Guard 12 didn't respond, just retreating back into the room to what they were previously doing before being interrupted. However, thanks to last time, Thornbred understood that this was likely a sign of "follow me inside," since they hadn't closed the door. He trotted in behind them, closing the door. Guard 12 had returned to their seat in front of their desk. The layout of the room itself hadn't changed. There was still a bed, wardrobe, and a desk similar to the others, but the wall design certainly had. The pictures of Pegasi had changed and shifted, some places having more and some having less, alongside their respective colours. Some didn't have colours yet, instead being placed simply on black. This time, he did recognise one of the pictures. It was Azure. Her colour had not yet been added. I see you continued with your hobby. More pictures in Pegasi. I even see Azure in there. Thornbred comments as he walks over to Guard 12, interested in what they may be working on. On top of the desk were several tubes of Spectre paint, the processed grade C rainbows that the factory produced. These must have been the most recent production that the guards outside were moving about. Some were open and some were still sealed. Alongside this, there were paintbrushes of all different sizes and a small sketchbook that Guard 12 was currently working in. Guard 12 only nods, holding a paintbrush between their hooves for a more precise and stable grip. I remember last time I was here you didn't want to show me any of your work. Perhaps I could see some of it now? Thornbred asks, taking a seat next to Guard 12 as he tries to peer over their shoulder at their work. This was no easy feat, however, due to Guard 12 being taller. Guard 12 drops the paintbrush, using their hoof to quickly close the sketchbook, despite it still being wet with paint.
No, my work is private.
Understood. Thornbred sighs, still not being used to the secrecy of the workers in the factory, even with their personal life. Well, do you mind if we start the interview? I don't want to keep you from your art for too long. He quickly flashes a smile to try and prompt a more positive result from Guard 12.
Okay.
Guard 12 nods, shuffling around to face Thornbred while remaining sitting.
What is it that you want to know?
Thornbred came prepared. He had thought of possible questions and requests for Guard 12 since he left Dr. Crowhop's office yesterday. There was always an element of unpredictability in interviews, but the more information gained, the better. He grabs his clipboard and pencil, ready to transcribe the interview. As you know, my research is related to the development of Factory Stress Desaturation, a condition that is common within 7R. Most Pegasi lose all hue and hope after working here as long as you have. So tell me, how does any pony, let alone an Earth pony, keep their sanity? Guard 12 stays silent for a second, not moving their body or head. Why? Did the question upset them? Were they not going to give an answer? Thornbred couldn't know. Eventually, he began to ask the next question. Do you
tell me you're the researcher?
Thornbred froze. It was an annoying answer, somewhat insulting that Guard 12 was withholding information from him. The usual "no" or "I can't say" would have sufficed. Do you not know, or are you not willing to tell me? The elaboration was needed. If Guard 12 couldn't provide an answer, then the response would be less infuriating. If they could.
I don't know.
Guard 12 grunts out. Okay. Thornbred sighs once more, pushing past the annoyance from Guard 12's responses. And the guards that do fall victim to Factory Stress Desaturation, do they have any similarities, anything that relates them to one another? Guard 12 stays silent once more, processing and recalling anything they could about the guards that worked here. From what Thornbred understood, there could have been anywhere between 10 and 100. He wanted to know all about all of them, but understood if the answer was slightly less detailed.
They're all brightly coloured Pegasi.
Nothing else? Something like gender, family relations?
No. Some mares, some stallions. Some had loved ones. Some were single.
It piqued Thornbred's interest in the guards. He knew they were ponies, of course they were, but this was the first time he actually thought about just who they were. All of them had names, families, and lives behind the deponyizing numbers that were assigned to them. He wanted to know more, but already knew that finding out such information would be difficult, as most things are in 7R. What about cutie marks? Were any of them artists like yourself, or were their talents more closely related to their work?
Some were guards, some were builders, some were flyers. A range of talents. Not that it matters in this job.
Thornbred had to admit that it was strange. Almost every pony he'd ever met worked in a field related to their cutie mark, or at least something similar. Hearing that the guards here could come from any background was definitely unusual. So, you're an exception. You said that you were invited to work here due to your artistic mind. Were they not also?
No.
How do guards get selected then if not based on talent? Guard 12 is silent once more. However, unlike the last time, there is never a response, just the blank void where their eyes should be through the tinted visor of the gas mask. I assume you can't tell for whatever reason. Guard 12 nods. Thornbred sighs, another area of research lost to his lack of clearance. It's something that you should have requested from Dr. Crowhop at the end of the meeting yesterday. Hindsight is clearer than the present. Something else that I've been told is that guards and scientists within Subsection 7R are more likely to develop FSD, but not the mechanics. Could you possibly provide any insight into why that may be?
Mechanics aren't exposed to the raw material as often.
The raw materials, the ones used in the production of spectra? Guard 12 nods. Finally, a new lead. The development of FSD could be linked to the raw materials used in the production of spectra. With all the different curses and effects from magical elements across Equestria, FSD could already be documented under a different name. Maybe some pony had already discovered a cure. Thornbred's job would be much easier if so. Do you have a sample of the raw material that I could see?
No, the raw material isn't something we stock.
Thornbred nods, intrigued by what the raw material could be. Surely it would be more efficient to stock it at all times, thus creating more rainbows more consistently. Perhaps it was some rare material that had to be sourced far away, maybe even outside of Equestria. It was exciting despite creating more questions than answers. Does it have a name, some sort of mineral or resource?
No.
Thornbred nods as he writes down the transcript in his thoughts. It would certainly make researching potential possibilities more difficult without a name or description, but it was better than nothing. And what about the waste product it produces? I noticed that when we went to the PEGASUS room that everything was coated in this thick oil. Do the guards and scientists handle that often?
Yes, guards dispose of most of it. Some of it is sent to the scientists.
Another lead. Not only is the raw material potentially to blame, but so is the waste product. It would require further research, but this was more information than any other pony had given him, even if still remaining vague. That should be enough for now, thank you. Thornbred smiles towards Guard 12. This time it was less of an attempt to appear more friendly and closer to a genuine smile. The guard had provided more useful information than any pony else, so it was hard not to feel some sort of joy towards them, despite never actually seeing their face. Thornbred began to pack up his notes, not only excited about the new information that he'd discovered, but also about the more unofficial meeting with the mechanic later on. It made his wings flutter. Guard 12 simply just nods, turning around and opening up their sketchbook once more as they continued to paint. Thornbred, now with his saddlebags on his back, trotted towards the door, stopping just as he was exiting, to give a wave to Guard 12. I will likely see you when I have conducted more research. Thank you once again. Guard 12 turns to look at Thornbred with a silent gaze, then turned back to their current project without a word. It was expected of Guard 12. Thornbred slips out of the door, closing it gently behind him before attempting to find Supply Closet 4. How many supply closets could a place have? Many. It was easy to forget the scale of the weather factory. This wasn't just a bakery from Manhattan, it was a massive building.
Thornbred found up to supply closet 50 while searching. Who knows how much higher it could go. In his search, he eventually found supply closet 4. It was a short walk away from Spectra production, probably why the mechanic chose it for the meeting place. There was little reason to go out into other departments of the factory for such a simple meeting. Thornbred stood in front of the door, gently resting the hoof on its handle and pushing it open. Luckily, supply closets are not classified as important enough to be guarded by the strict clearance issues he'd faced up until this point. Inside was a dimly lit room, probably half the size of his own room within 7R, lined with shelves and crates of all different materials and tools. It was nothing out of the ordinary. Cleaning chemicals, toolboxes, and some spare parts for the machines ranging from cogs to springs. But despite what he had been told, Thornbred could not see any pony in the room.
Hello, anyone in here?
He spoke out. He didn't yell, keeping his voice down at regular levels. There was multiple reasons for this. One was that the closet wasn't big enough to require yelling to grab any pony's attention, but alongside that, he didn't want to attract the attention of any guards or scientists nearby, suspecting that this wasn't a meeting they would approve of. A quiet shuffle was heard from the back corner of the room as a pony suddenly walked out of the darkness. Thornbred didn't know much about the mechanic that he'd met next to the PEGASUS device. It was far too dark to see anything about colour or any other defining features, so it was hard to confirm this was the pony he was here to meet. "Thornbred, are you alone?" They whimpered out. The voice was the same as the mechanic's, that same uncertain and afraid tone that he carried when asked about the factory and his work. Thornbred recoiled, looking over his shoulder before nudging the door closed behind him with his back hoof. "As far as I'm aware, the guards seem more focused on other matters." "Good." The Pegasi trots further into the light, allowing Thornbred to see more details about them. He was young, a similar age to Thornbred, with a black mane and dull grey coat with a subtle blue undertone. He wore an orange jumpsuit with the logo of the weather factory on its flank. He was covered in oil from the machines like last time, but now in the light, Thornbred spotted that it was all a deep red. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. What should I call you?" Thornbred smiles, keeping that same professional tone that he always had during these work-related interactions.
Draft Barnshed. But Barnshed is fine." Barnshed offers a hoof to Thornbred, who gladly shakes it. A friendly gesture was rare in this place, so he would take anything he could get. "Well, Barnshed, what is it you wanted to show me?" Thornbred breaks away from the hoof shake, placing his hoof down on the ground once more. Barnshed sits down with a thud, nodding. "Well, you asked me about the PEGASUS device, the raw material of spectra, the production of spectra, the production of rainbows. None of them were going to tell you anything." "So, you are?" Thornbred looks at Barnshed with a surprised look. Not once had any pony offered to tell him anything about the production of rainbows, only having been told that it's complicated and it requires a machine to do so. It was otherworldly hearing a potential offer.
"Just not in there. That's why I asked you to come here. Only the mechanics come in here, and that's only when doing maintenance on the PEGASUS, which shouldn't be for a couple of weeks now." "Understood. The guards here are definitely intimidating enough without being angry at you."
Thornbred smiles, taking a seat in front of Barnshed.
"I won't tell them. They can keep secrets, so why can't I?"
Barnshed nods, a small smile on his face with the reassurance that he won't be discovered.
"Well, where do I begin? There's a lot that you don't know." "Let's start with a bit about yourself. How long have you been working here at the weather factory?" Thornbred smiled. Whilst the most important part of this interaction was the secret of rainbows and spectra, he couldn't help but want to know more about the Pegasi in front of him. "Well now, both me and my sister started working here at the same time, maybe a few moons or so. It's hard to remember." He sighs, scratching the back of his neck with a wing. "I see. Does your sister also work in 7R? "No, well, kind of. She was a delivery pony for rainbows. Never worked on creating them, but was always moving spectra and rainbows from place to place. She loved the job, meant the world to her." Barnshed's expression remains blank and distant, almost as if he wasn't present in the conversation at all. "Did she ever develop symptoms of factory stress desaturation? I hear it's pretty common with those involved in rainbows." "No, never. She was lucky not to have seen what we have. At least not much of it." "Seen what?"
Thornbred was confused. No one had ever elaborated on what could be causing FSD. Hearing of ponies that handled Spectre and Rainbows often without developing the condition, alongside Barnshed's own addition of seeing something to cause it, contrasted previous theories and beliefs of it being related to the materials themselves. The Pegasus device in action. Could you elaborate further? I've seen it myself, but it's hard to guess what it actually does. It just looks like a big metal box to me. Thornbred's interest was piqued. So the Pegasus device is the cause of FSD. It was a lot of information to take in at once, if any of it was even true. That's what it is to most. Very few ponies understand how it works, and all of them are mechanics. Not even the scientists or guards know. Barnshed trots deeper into the supply closet to a small secluded area near the back, surrounded with tools, shelves and boxes. He lights a small lamp, illuminating a chair and a toolbox. Opening the toolbox, he pulls out a sheet of paper, rolling it out on the floor. The simplest way to describe it is a mill and a press in one device. It grinds up and squeezes whatever goes into it, producing spectra and whatever waste in the process. Thornbred peers down at the paper, seeing it's some blueprints for the machine. Of course, it was largely unreadable to Thornbred due to a lack of understanding of engineering and other mechanical principles, but it definitely helped with visualizing what Barnshed was saying. So, like what is done to apples make apple juice? I always thought Spectre was more complicated. That's the short hoof of it. Thing goes in, is juiced. Spectre and whatever is left comes out. Thornbred stayed quiet. None of it made sense. The Pegasus device was just a big juice press. How could it cause Pegasi to degrade in such a way? There was something he was missing. And this may be his only chance to find out what. What goes in? Every pony has always just said raw materials, but never actually told me what it is. I just naturally assumed it was some kind of rock or something. Thornbred looks towards Barnshed with a confused look. Barnshed sighs, taking a glance downward before looking back up to Thornbred. Do you remember your flight exam? Thornbred scowls, but nods, albeit very slowly. Yeah, that test we all had to do when we were younger. Who could forget? Did you know anyone who failed? One of my classmates did, I think. He was a nice guy, but was never the best at flying. But who was at that age? Thornbred's confused expression continues. The conversation topic was completely unrelated, which was almost expected of conversations within the factory. Vague and mysterious with some deeper meaning. Only if he could figure out what this one's was. Do you ever wonder what happened to him? Barnshed's expression remains unfazed and unchanging, blank and cold. Thornbred began to realise that Barnshed was possibly experiencing late-stage FSD himself. Well, not really. We weren't awfully close. Maybe it crossed my mind once or twice. They are brought here after everyone else has graduated. Whilst you and your friends were celebrating, they were here. I always thought they were just sent somewhere far away, perhaps up north. Why here? Thornbred remained confused. Nothing seemed to make sense. The Pegasi who failed were always deemed as failures, not good enough for Cloudsdale. They were something that needed to be disposed of. Why would they be given to the weather factory? They were being ground up, squeezed of all their essence. Spectre and Rainbows are beautiful, but they come at a high cost. Thornbred's jaw fell open in shock. He wasn't one not to believe others. Generally, he wanted to think that everyone was trustworthy and was telling the truth, but this truth was one that was hard to swallow. Everyone loved rainbows. They are always a symbol of hope, the good after the storm, a time of celebration. Knowing that they were made of despair and failure was a crushing truth. No, that can't be. Celestia would not allow it. Celestia doesn't know, neither does Luna. She just thinks they're nightmares. No pony knows. Only we do. Thoughts flooded his mind. So many Pegasi, including himself, have just been one wrong wing flap, one wrong turn or dive away from facing this fate. The fact that he was here right now seemed insane with this realization. The feeling of horror quickly was accompanied by one of sickness and nausea. His little sister was going to be doing her flight exam soon. If she failed, she would be here. had turned into something for everyone to enjoy at the cost of her own suffering. All those ponies who have pranced around, had weddings and celebrations under a rainbow. They were all just the corpses of Pegasi. His legs gave out, causing him to fall to the floor as his stomach cramped, expelling everything from inside of it. Luckily, he avoided getting vomit on barn shed or anything around him, instead just forming a puddle on the floor. How can you be so calm? This is... Thornbred's eyes began to tear up upon the realization of what is going on, the combination of fear, nausea, and sadness hitting him like a train. I have seen more suffering than you could ever know. The nausea fades, but the guilt doesn't. Barnshed didn't react to Thornbred vomiting or the tears. It was nothing compared to the death of hundreds of Pegasi. Why? Why are you telling me this? What's the point? Thornbred whines out as he battles the burning sensation of bile running up his throat. For my sister. She... Barnshed looks towards the toolbox, slowly opening it and pulling out a vial of light blue liquid. By the staining on the glass walls, Thornbred could tell that it was rather old compared to the other spectra samples that he had seen. She... that's her? Thornbred gasps out, staring at the vial nestled into Barnshed's wing. Barnshed nods, a single tear falling from his eye. After she fell victim to that machine, I vowed to avenge her. Make sure her death was not for nothing. I want to stop this all. Thornbred stayed staring at Barnshed and the vial, mouth agape as he struggles to comprehend anything that he is hearing over the nausea remaining deep within his core. He nods slowly, once again suppressing the gagging. But how? We need to get rid of Rainbow Dash. Thornbred stumbled out from the supply closet, his body tense with fear and sickness at the new information. Rainbows are made from dead ponies, and now it was on his shoulders to stop it. Barnshed had told him that the only way to stop the production of rainbows was to get rid of Rainbow Dash. This was easier said than done. Rainbow Dash hadn't been seen in a long time, not since Scootaloo had disappeared. Dr. Crowhop refused to arrange a meeting with her, stating that she was too busy with her duties within the factory. Without a meeting, talking to Rainbow Dash would be impossible, let alone getting rid of her. Thornbred didn't even know how he would do so. He was never one to think about hurting others. Killing an element of harmony was a tall order. Deep in his thought, his hooves guided him throughout 7R, leading him out into the main factory building and to the canteen. He'd skipped breakfast this morning. Food was out of the option. The lingering taste of bile was enough to ensure that, but some water or juice could potentially help. He stumbled into the canteen, grabbing a small cup of water before finding a seat. Luckily he had missed the morning rush, and the canteen was relatively empty. Only a few stragglers running back to their workstations with cups of coffee or some food hanging out of their mouth. It was comedic and light-hearted, allowing Thornbred to relax a bit as he gathered his thoughts. Rainbow Dash had to eat or drink. She couldn't sit in an office all day. She had to leave at some point. She also had to leave to do her job. Some pony must know when and where. But who? No pony outside of 7R would know, leaving only the guards, scientists and engineers of 7R. One of them had to know. Look who it is! A familiar voice called out. Azure trotted into the canteen, her mane frizzy and poofy from underneath her hard hat. Didn't see you this morning. Thought you might have gone missing or something. Thornbred looks towards her, his wide-eyed gaze slowly returned to a more normal expression. I had a lot to do. Interviews mainly, important ones too. Why are you here? Shouldn't you be at your station? Azure chuckles, taking a seat in front of Thornbred once more. Well, a small incident got the living daylight shocked out of me. One of the trainees must have overcharged the clouds or something. Management told me to have a break. Something to do with health and safety. That must be cause of the mane. Well, I doubt this is the big next hair trend, is it? Azure sarcastically remarks, smirking at Thornbred. Thornbred falls into silence. It was hard to communicate after such a devastating discovery. It's all that was on his mind, and telling Azure was strictly off the table. Azure, how did your friends do in the flight exam? Huh? Azure scowled slightly. The question was unexpected. Pretty much everyone stops talking about their flight exam straight after passing. It's just one of those things that every Pegasi does. Did any of them fail? Well, yeah, quite a few. My friends were awful good flyers back then. She chuckles, rubbing the back of her head, causing small sparks between her hoof and mane at times. Thornbred fell silent. He had hoped that Azure would say no, but he got the opposite. Azure had multiple friends fail the exam, not just one. Do you ever wonder what happened to them? I just assume they got shipped off to some colony up north. Flying up there is too dangerous anyway due to the snow, so they wouldn't need to. Azure said, smiling with a mix of joy and sadness. On one hoof, her friends moved away, but on the other hoof, they aren't gone. Well, at least not to her knowledge. Thornbred nodded slowly, forcing a smile. Yeah, that's what I always thought too. What interviews have you been doing? Azure smiles as she changes the topic of conversation. It was partially to avoid the awkward silence, but also just out of personal interest for Thornbred's work. Must be some pretty interesting ponies inside of 7R. Well, I was talking to an engineer about his experience with FSD. I was trying to find anything that I could use to figure out some way to prevent it from happening. It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't a lie either. And did you find out? Or is this one of those things you can't tell me? Azure chuckles with a smirk, easily accepting the secrecy of information about 7R much better than Thornbred ever could. Well, the production of spectra causes the development of FSD, something to do with the raw materials. They still aren't telling you what it is? I'm not surprised. Thornbred sighed, looking downwards towards the table and gently dragging his hoof across it, disturbing some of the trace food crumbs left over from whoever sat here last. Is something wrong? Azure leaned forward towards Thornbred. Thornbred looked up towards Azure, a tired and empty look on his face. He wanted to tell her everything, all that he had discovered in 7R. He wanted to tell all of Equestria, but he couldn't, out of safety for those around him and himself. This was strictly his burden to bear. Just 7R isn't the nicest place to work. Very cold, intimidating. This side of the factory is a lot nicer, a lot less guards staring you down at any chance they get. I mean, I expected as much. Having ponies watch over your shoulder all the time must be pretty annoying, right? Stressful. Very stressful. But I can't stop until I completed my task. I wish I could help you with that, I really do. It just seems stupid how they expect you to solve such a big problem whilst being told nothing. Azure's face twinges with anger. It wasn't like her to be angry, in the fact she had been nothing but pleasant up until this point. She saw Thornbred as a friend, and seeing how unfair his workplace was just couldn't be ignored. No! Thornbred slams his hoof against the table, jolting upwards and looking towards Azure. No, you don't want to help. I don't want you getting hurt. He pauses, before quickly resuming his speech. I don't want to see you losing your job because of me. I can deal with this on my own. I'm not saying you can't. I just want to make things easier, that's all. Azure grunts out. Having her help denied so aggressively wasn't exactly a pleasant experience. She couldn't help but display some form of anger towards Thornbred. Well, just stay out of 7R. It's not a place you want to be in. Thornbred pushes himself up to standing, taking a step back from the table with a stomp of his hooves. Azure stays silent. She doesn't have a response towards Thornbred at this point. See you later, Azure. Thornbred huffs as he walks away, his body tense and his head hung low. See you later, Thornbred. Thornbred trudged through the hallways of the factory, eventually leading to the hallways of Subsection 7R. A mixture of emotions filled his body. Anger, sadness, worry, determination, guilt. But the most impactful of them all was stress. The same thoughts went through his head over and over again. Get rid of Rainbow Dash. Stop any pony else from getting hurt. He would eventually find himself back in his room, notes still scattered everywhere from his research, the interviews of every pony he'd met so far. Before he realised it, he was laying on the floor. His body couldn't keep going. Through all the vomiting and emotional turmoil, he was exhausted. Sleep wasn't what he wanted, but what he needed.
He simply couldn't resist as his eyes began to close, plunging him into a world of darkness. The familiar feeling of air blowing through his mane struck him, the bright blue sky and the cloudy ground that he hadn't seen since he had started working in the weather factory. It was refreshing, a break from the harsh industrial architecture that he was forced to endure. The blow of a whistle brought Thornbred back into focus. He was in Cloudsdale Stadium, where all large events took place, from Wonderbolt shows to weddings. It was one that he was familiar with, that every Pegasi was familiar with. This event especially. The barking of the flight instructor was a good enough indicator. This was the flight exams. Parents and family members often wanted to watch their little ones complete such a big milestone in their life. But why was he here? He didn't have any children of his own, and likely wouldn't for a long time. He felt out of place when compared to the mares and stallions sitting around him. Clear, fly, fall, complete. Those 4 words marked the beginning of a flight. The fast movement made it hard to recognize the fall as they darted through the clouds. They seemed to be doing well, narrowly avoiding all the clouds scattered across the course. It was hoof-biting, but impressive for somebody of their age. That was until the loud thud as they flew directly into one of the clouds. This was quickly followed by a scream of pain as they fell downwards towards the ground. Thornbred gasped. The fall was light purple with a black mane. It was his sister. He sprung up from his seat, darting past every pony in the stands, narrowly avoiding hitting some of the larger mares and stallions in his haste. He didn't want her to fail the flight exam. Hitting the ground would hurt, but the failure would be fatal. He dashed downwards towards her, grabbing her in his hooves before plunging through the clouds at the bottom of the Colosseum. It was dark. A smell of iron and rot filled the air, accompanied by the grinding of gears and thuds of machinery. Thornbred found himself directly in the middle of this new room. He quickly recognized it. Scanning around, he saw a large PEGASUS device across from himself. An unknown figure was standing on the catwalk above. Thornbred's sister held by their hoof above the mouth of the device. No! Thornbred began to walk, then trot, then gallop, eventually ending with a full-speed flight towards the figure. He knew what they were about to do. As he drew closer, his sister's hoof slipped, causing her to fall downwards into the machine with a sickening crunch and a blood-curdling scream. Thornbred could only watch in horror as a cackling filled the room. His sister was dead, and his eyes were set on the figure responsible. Thornbred jolted upwards, his mane a mess and his clothes creased and slightly dirty from sleeping on the floor. A pain spread across his stomach and his head. It was just a nightmare. A horrific one, but a nightmare at that. With a groan, he pushed himself upwards from the floor. There was no time to waste. The pain across his body and the drowsy feeling would just have to wait. Rainbow Dash was a strong pony. All those hours of flying for the Wonderbolts and the countless years of training had made her near the best of the best for their kind. There was no way Thornbred could take her down by himself. Very few Pegasi could without a large group. Not only did he have to find her, but also gather some pony else who was equally strong, if not more, as her. First, he needed to find some pony who knew where Rainbow Dash was. Without this, strength was irrelevant. He already knew that Dr. Growhop wouldn't provide him the answer. He doubted that Azure nor Barnshed knew. Only one pony might, however. Guard 12. Whilst it is true that Guard 12 would be unlikely to provide an answer, it was the only lead that Thornbred had. Guard 12, whilst withdrawn, was more willing to interact than any of the other guards would be. If there was a chance to get any information, it would be from them. He quickly left for Guard 12's room. Once again, he forgot to go get breakfast. The pain in his stomach made eating unappealing. It took a while for Thornbred to reach the room. The winding corridors were still unfamiliar to him, and it certainly didn't help when passing by the Rainbow production facilities. The worst of it all was waste disposal. He knew what was in there, what caused that strange smell from before. It was sickening. However, after stumbling along, often using the wall for assistance, Thornbred made it to Guard 12's room. He held a hoof up to it. Just as all the times prior, Guard 12 answered the door, remaining physically unchanged. They still wore their gas mask and uniform. Hello there, I am here to conduct another interview. New information has been discovered that I think would be important to discuss with you. Thornbred spluttered out, trying to keep as a professional of a facade as possible. If it was working, was a completely different question. Guard 12 nods, returning once more to their desk. They were doing some sketching with a charcoal stick.
Luckily, the staining from the tool blended in well with their uniform. Thornbred followed in behind Guard 12, taking note of the room once more. Again, everything had shifted. Pictures were elsewhere. Some were removed, some now coloured, some new ones. Azur's portrait was still on the wall, this time with a small green dot and a large blue one next to it. He stopped behind Guard 12, peering over their shoulder at their work. He hadn't seen any of it up until this point, and the curiosity had gotten the better of him. Inside the sketchbook were detailed sketches of ponies in all different kinds of positions, laying down, standing, sitting. Some were even standing on their hind legs. Just what one might expect from an experienced artist. "I see you're still keeping busy with your drawings," Thornbred remarked. It wasn't aimed at Guard 12 specifically, more being a mental note to himself that is said out loud. Guard 12 quickly closed the sketchbook, turning to face Thornbred.
Yes?
"Well, I won't keep you from continuing for too long. I just have some things to discuss." Guard 12 nods. "What do you know about Rainbow Dash? Where she is, what she does, that sort of thing?" Guard 12 remains quiet as they usually do, thinking of their answer long before saying it.
I don't see her very often. Maybe once or twice a month. Whenever shipments come in.
"Shipments of raw materials?"
Yeah. She oversees Spectre production and Rainbow distribution.
"I see. Do you know where she is at any other time? I believe an interview with her would provide beneficial information. Sadly, no one seems willing to set one up with her."
No.
"Okay." Thornbred sighs. He was hoping to at least talk with Rainbow Dash outside of her work, maybe in an office or a bedroom like he had with Guard 12. Seems the only time he would reliably be able to find her is during Spectre production, whenever that may be. "And for the shipments, you said they come in once or twice a month. Is there a specific date?"
Yes.
"And are you allowed to tell me?"
No.
Thornbred looks to Guard 12, a question arising in his head. "Are you involved with Spectre production?"
Yes.
Thornbred's eyes go wide. He always tried to see the best in ponies, past all their flaws and wrongdoings. But this time it was hard to ignore the blatant disregard for the lives of ponies in the production of a product that wasn't needed. Rainbows are purely aesthetic. Whilst pleasant, they aren't essential for everyday life. "So, you know what Spectre is made out of? What the raw materials are?" Guard 12 nods. "Ponies, right? All those foals that failed their flight exam?" Thornbred couldn't help but say. He knew he couldn't tell Azure. She didn't know, and frankly, he didn't want her to. But Guard 12 knew. Not only did they know, but they played an active role in this crime against pony kind. He wanted to know if they felt guilt, remorse, or anything about their contribution to such. If they could feel anything at all.
What?
Guard 12 tilted their head, finally shifting away from their blank and monotone voice. It was a surprise. "You know what I'm talking about!" Thornbred huffed out, raising his voice slightly. The anger was taking over, all those emotions that he kept hidden finally surfacing. "Spectre is produced through the death of ponies, crushed up and mangled as if they were nothing more than apples off an apple tree." Guard 12 remained still, not responding or speaking. "Do you really have that little value for pony kind? Those aren't just materials for you to use, they are living things that messed up one stupid fly exam. Do you know how that must feel for them? For their family and friends who live based on lies? Who live celebrating the corpses of their loved ones splayed across the sky?" Thornbred began to yell now, tears beginning to flow down his cheeks. He was not only furious, but distraught from the thought of what he was saying, through the thought of his sister suffering that fate, the thought of friends and family suffering at hands of 7R. It was horrific. The lack of response from Guard 12 was hardly helping. He was hoping for some kind of apology, some hint of sadness or guilt. All he got was nothing. Did Guard 12 care at all?
It has to be done.
Guard 12 slowly stands up, looking down at Thornbred as they do. Thornbred was taken aback. Guard 12's voice had shifted, sounding slightly more aggressive than usual.
it was still hardly an admittance of guilt. "Has to be done to make a few pathetic rainbows?" Thornbred also stood up, approaching Guard 12, his wings flaring outwards in rage. "To make a few mediocre paints, all those wonderful pieces of artwork with so much emotion and passion, just to be undermined by death."
Guard 12 walks towards the door, stepping around Thornbred. For a small second, Thornbred felt fear. Guard 12 was likely going to alert the other guards of the breach in security. He would be sent to spectral production with the rest of the falls and failures. But that quickly faded. He didn't care. If he could convince Guard 12 that this was wrong, the risk could be worthwhile. Thornbred stomps towards Guard 12's desk, swiping the sketchbook up with his wing and unfolding it onto a random page containing a painting of a pony. Artists are supposed to be full of emotion and passion for their work, yet you lack all of that, preferring to be an emotionless cog in a machine of death. Why? Why abandon your talent for something so horrific, so cruel? Guard 12 stopped just before opening the door, frozen as they turned their heads slightly towards Thornbred. If their eyes were visible, they'd be looking out the corner of their eye. "You're a talented artist, one who could have done great things, yet you chose to come here. Abandon all that made you you for what? Some monotonous..."
"It wasn't a choice."
Guard 12 twists around, stomping the ground as they face Thornbred.
"Being good at what you do isn't enough. There are so many ponies in this world that are good at what I do."
Guard 12 began to approach Thornbred, uncaring for the Pegasi's angered and aggressive state.
"I spent years creating paintings and drawings, all for what? Just so those snobby cantalop ponies act like I don't exist. Do you know how that feels? To have your one special talent be so blatantly ignored?"
Guard 12 stops, their face inches away from Thornbred. He could hear the panting coming from inside the gas mask.
"And the one time I get somewhere, a job that wants me for my talent, you act like I'm the evil one. Like I'm the one who's done something wrong. I am not. You are wrong. This factory is wrong. Equestria is wrong. And eventually, you learn not to care."
Guard 12 sits down with a thud. They look downwards towards the ground, releasing a loud sigh.
"All the suffering that the world has put me through, the suffering we put these foals through, I learn not to care."
Both of them sat in silence for a while, both shocked at what had been said, what had happened. Neither of them were ones to speak about their emotions in such a way. Having both of them do so was definitely out of the ordinary. Guard 12 was first to break the silence. They didn't move from their position on the floor, just uttering 3 words.
"Go. Leave. Now."
Thornbred stopped. He'd calmed down a bit after Guard 12 had spoke, no longer as angry or upset. If anything, he felt bad for Guard 12 being forced into such a position. "Don't give up." Guard 12 pointed towards the door. Thornbred placed the sketchbook back onto the desk, allowing his wings to fall back down to his side. He bowed his head as he walked over to the door, turning to face Guard 12 once more before leaving. "You're not evil, just misdirected." Guard 12 dropped their hoof back to the floor, sitting completely still. Thornbred sighed, turning back and leaving Guard 12's room. Where he was going to go was uncertain, but he knew he couldn't be here. He decided to go to the cafeteria. He had missed breakfast for a few days now, and the pain from the hunger in his stomach was beginning to set in. Even if he did feel ill, he had to eat something eventually. The place was pretty empty. He had no clue what time it was, but it was likely far from any scheduled breaks. It was nice knowing that he wouldn't see any other pony. He didn't want to. A quiet meal alone was very appealing. Thornbred grabbed whatever food they had left, resulting in a bowl of strawberries and some hay sandwich, and went to sit once more at the table he and Azure had been so accustomed to. He doubted he would see her. She was likely at work once more at this time. Unless another accident occurred, he wouldn't see her until tomorrow. He sat alone, peacefully enjoying his food. At least as much as some pony could enjoy their food in this situation. He couldn't help but continue to think about the task at Hoof. What next? He still had to find Rainbow Dash, and the only way of doing that was by finding out when each shipment of foals came in. At first it seemed impossible to find out. Just like any other shipment, they could come in pretty much at random. But this was not just a normal shipment. The flight exam happened on a regular basis, every couple of weeks for different age ranges of foals. The shipments could only come in each time a flight exam had been conducted. Thornbred didn't know when the last flight exam was. Ever since he moved to Manhattan, he didn't keep up with events in Cloudsdale unless his sister told him about them in their semi-weekly letters. He would have to find someone else who did know. Who else better than Azure? Thornbred hadn't talked to many of the non-7R factory workers in his time here. In fact, Azure was the only one that he'd talked to at all. Even if they didn't exactly leave off on the best terms during their last conversation, he didn't doubt that Azure would be willing to help him. It was hard to deny that Thornbred did feel slightly guilty about how he had responded to Azure. He knew that she was just trying to help him, even if it was getting her dangerously close to being terminated. He would just have to wait. In the meantime, there was little that Thornbred could do besides return to his room and write up some more of his findings. If he succeeded or failed, at least there would be a record of his findings. If he succeeded, he could send them to Celestia and officially put a stop to the weather factory. If not, well, some pony else would hopefully find them. There was no nightmare tonight, or little sleep at all for that matter. The ambience of the factory had changed. Not only was there the constant industrial sounds that Thornbred had become accustomed to, this time there was something more. Rhythmic hoofsteps and the trundling of a carriage, all accompanied by soft sobs and cries, quiet and weary. Thornbred could only assume that this was the foals, and there would be no other explanation of why. 7R was a silent and desolate place most of the time. The sounds of hoofsteps and carts being pulled was not strange in the slightest, but the cries, drained and dead. He must have fallen asleep at some point, even if just for a minute or so. The cries had gone, no more than just the distant hum of machines. Thornbred dragged himself out of bed. His body hardly wanted to, quite the opposite as his eyelids fluttered between closed and opened. But he had to do this. Azure was his only hope of getting the information he needed. Luckily, he fell asleep whilst dressed, sparing him the task of putting on clothing. He could just leave and go to the canteen despite his distraught and messy appearance. There was a letter under the door. He recognized it from last time. It was Dr. Crowhop requesting a meeting with him once more, same wording and format as the last time. Thornbred let out a groan. Talking with Azure would be draining enough. A conversation with Crowhop was almost out of the question. But alas, he had no choice in the matter. He knew how forceful Crowhop could be. At least he could go and get breakfast this time. Making his way to the canteen, Thornbred did all he could to correct his mane and tail, gently running over it with his wings and hooves in a frail attempt to straighten the hairs into a more formal styling. The canteen was busy, all different kinds of Pegasi eating and talking with their friends. Thornbred was an outlier, alone and slow with his movements. It was heartbreaking. Eventually all these ponies would have to find out the truth that had just been under their noses. What would they feel? That was for a later time. Azure was the main priority. Normally Thornbred didn't have to look for Azure. She usually made herself known through a friendly wave or by yelling Thornbred's name. Finding her among the sea of identically dressed workers was surprisingly difficult. He trotted row by row, up and down the canteen tables, looking for Azure. Once. Twice. 3 times. She wasn't here. Thornbred had looked everywhere, every table and every seat. She wasn't here. He waited, watching the herd slowly thin out, only until a wingful of ponies were left. None of them were Azure. She wasn't here. Great. Thornbred whined out, snarling slightly as he approached the food stall, grabbing a blueberry muffin and a coffee. He could only hope Azure would stumble in late whilst he ate. Maybe she had overslept or something. A stallion can hope. The muffin was soon gone and the coffee was quick to follow. Azure still hadn't made an entrance, leaving Thornbred alone in the canteen. The meeting with Crowhop was coming soon. He couldn't wait for Azure forever. With a deep sigh, Thornbred pushed himself up and trotted back to 7R, as ready as possible to face Dr. Crowhop once more. The door at the end of the corridor was already intimidating, surrounded by silence, almost as if life itself was scared of what or who was inside. Thornbred had only assumed it was because Crowhop was his superior. He made the choice to hire Thornbred and could easily fire him too, so of course meeting with him would be worrying. What if he said or did something wrong? Now that view had changed. Dr. Crowhop was no longer his boss, someone who controlled his employment. He was a monster,
Some pony who oversaw and approved the killing of foals, all whilst feigning care for his own employees. Dr. Crowhop knew why so many workers were developing FSD. No pony could be that oblivious to reality. Thornbred raised a hoof. Without hesitation, he knocked on the door. It was swiftly opened by Dr. Crowhop. He was stern as per usual. Thornbred, come in. I believe we have much to discuss. Thornbred trotted past, taking a seat in the chair in front of Crowhop's desk. He didn't want to look at the Pegasi in front of him. In fact, he didn't want to be anywhere near such an inconsiderate and evil pony. Dr. Crowhop trotted back over to his desk, taking a seat with a smile on his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It never was. It was always a fake and manipulative one, like an animal acting weak and helpless, only to attack when least expected. So tell me, how has your research come along? Any theories or ideas on FSD? Thornbred slowly nods, attempting to hold back the same anger that he'd put onto Guard 12. He knew that letting Dr. Crowhop know about his discovery would end badly. It's something to do with the raw materials and waste materials. Every pony who's had contact with them has ended up developing Factory Stress Desaturation. I see. Any possible idea on why that may be? Dr. Crowhop leaned towards Thornbred, the same smug grin continuing throughout his speech. It was taunting him with the knowledge of the PEGASUS device and the fate of the foals. No. Well, since you lack the clearance of such information, Dr. Crowhop smiles, trotting over to Thornbred, standing right next to him. I believe that our staff can take care of the problem from here. Confused, Thornbred looked towards Dr. Crowhop. What? What do you mean? What I mean is that your employment at our facility is no longer required. You are no longer required. Dr. Crowhop continues to smile, trotting over and opening the door to his office. Behind it was 2 guards, shock baton and hoof. Thornbred turned towards the door. At first he was simply confused. Perhaps the guards were in the wrong place. Perhaps they were simply here for a meeting similar to his own. But it dawned on him as they began to approach. They were here for him. Wait, what are you doing? Thornbred began to yell, getting up from the chair and backing away into the corner like he had done once before in his previous meeting with Dr. Crowhop. Well, it has been brought to my attention. Dr. Crowhop turned around, standing behind the guards as he talks to Thornbred. That you know restricted information within Subsection 7R. As stated in your contract, this is grounds for termination. Termination? Thornbred shifted his gaze from the guards to Dr. Crowhop, his heart racing with fear. What information? In truth, Thornbred knew exactly what Dr. Crowhop was speaking about. Guard 12 must have told him of their conversation from the day prior. He knew the risk of this happening, but hoped that it never would. He hoped that Guard 12 would change their point of view, exchanging from the protocol of the factory to the morality of the rest of Equestria. Sadly, this didn't appear to be the case. Don't play dumb with me. We know of your conversations with Guard 12, your findings about the PEGASUS device, the rejects from the flight school, the production of Spectra. Dr. Crowhop watched as the guards inched closer and closer, the tips of their batons beginning to crackle with lightning. Thornbred froze. Guard 12 hadn't changed. Guard 12 had reported him to Dr. Crowhop. He could only assume what the punishment for this was. Well, what are you going to do to me? You will join the rejects in the next batch of Spectra production. It is simpler and much more efficient than keeping you quiet. Dr. Crowhop cackles as the guards jam the tip of the batons into Thornbred's flank. The crackling of electricity was quickly replaced with a scream as Thornbred's hind legs buckled to the floor, cramping and spasming as the lightning burned into his flesh. If you had simply done your job, then you could have avoided this. You could have left here and returned home. Dr. Crowhop walks forward between the guards, looking downward onto Thornbred as he sits on the ground, his front legs scrambling to try and escape. Another shock, but this time to the front legs. Much to a similar result, Thornbred screamed and fell, now laying flat on the floor, his muscles aching and stinging still from the powerful jolt of electricity. This was quickly accompanied by a pressure on his back as both guards pinned him to the floor. Oh well, too late for all that now. Goodbye, Thornbred. Dr. Crowhop cackles once again, nodding towards the guards.
With one swift swing of the baton to the back of Thornbred's head, the world fell into darkness. He had lost. Thornbred awoke, his vision blurry and a constant thumping pain in his head. He could hardly recognize where he was in the dim light. Was this a dream? It certainly felt like one. Fuzzy vision, low light, confusion about your surroundings. It was kind of hard to view it as anything else. But then the smell. The same smell of the waste disposal room. The smell of death, accompanied by all those dull cries from the Foals. This was spectral production. He sprung upwards, hoof against his temple as the pain intensified. He was directly in the middle of all those wide-eyed foals, all with bruises from their failed attempt at flight. Some even had bandaged wings or broken legs. One thing they all shared was the crying. All of them were either crying or had the remnants of tears staining their face. Whilst they didn't know why they were here, they all knew one thing. They were failures. Thornbred slowly stood, looking around the room. He was already somewhat familiar with the simplistic layout from his previous time here. The Pegasus device was in front of him, the containers either side now empty, audibly groaning and crunching, ready to macerate whatever was thrown inside. Amidst the constant groaning and whining of the foals, there was not much Thornbred could do. He could only try to calm the children around him. He was the only adult after all. They would look to him for comfort, and he was not going to turn them away. If he couldn't convince Rainbow Dash to change her mind, this may be their final hours. He would want it to at least be pleasant. He made his way around the foals, tending to their needs as best he could. He may not have been able to deal with the physical injury, but at least he could help with the mental strain of this event. It provided a distraction from the inevitable doom facing them. Minutes passed with nothing. No pony entered the room or left. No guards or scientists or engineers joined them. The suspense was the worst part, not knowing when they would die. But finally, after Celestia knows how long, a loud clank was heard as a door above flung open. It was quickly followed by the clunking of hooves on the surface of a metal catwalk. Some of the ponies were guards, 3 to be exact, all armed with the standard batons. Thornbred could identify them by their silhouette of their masks and uniforms. However, there was a 4th pony. Their silhouette didn't seem familiar, the darkness providing anonymity. The group marched forward, stopping above the Pegasus device directly in front of the mouth of the machine. They stayed in formation, 2 guards to the left and 1 to the right, the unknown pony directly in the middle. "Hello all!" The pony in the middle spoke. Their voice was loud and confident, almost with a hint of arrogance. "I would welcome you, but failures don't deserve a welcome. You are the worst that Cloudesdale has to offer, Pegasi that can't even fly. All of you are pathetic excuses of ponies, one that should be forgotten and left behind." Their voice was full of venom and spite, carrying a true hatred for the failures below. "Now, I'm sure you all have lots of questions that don't deserve an answer. All you need to know is that this is the one place in Cloudsdale you will finally become useful." One of the healthier foals stood up, beginning to flap their wings and hover upwards towards the figures, a snarl on their face. "I am not a failure. I tried so hard." There was a click and a whoosh as bolus tangled around the foal's wings and neck, binding them and preventing further flight. This, of course, left the foal to fall to the ground, with a sickening thud and crack. "There always has to be one hero, one sickening creature that believes they can make a difference. Do any of you really think you're the first to try? We've had so many attempts, revisions of protocol and training. You should just give up now and prevent yourself the embarrassment of failing once again." The figure yells out as they stomp their hooves on the catwalk, causing loud clanking to rattle throughout the room. The fear and danger set in amongst the group, causing the foals to scream and beg for help from any pony they could think of. Most defaulted to parents or siblings. Some called for Celestia and Luna to help. Some called out for the elements of harmony. The figure began to chuckle, eventually delving into manic laughter. "You really think any of them can help you? Any Cloudsdale Pegasi wouldn't think twice about disowning you humiliations.
Celestia and Luna don't even know this place exists. And as for the elements of harmony...
A bright spotlight turns on, initially blinding the foals as their eyes forcefully adjust. They could now see the figure in detail. The dull blue coat, those lifeless purple eyes, the rainbow mane. Rainbow Dash.
I know they aren't coming to help you.
The shock and panic quickly spread across the foals. An icon they once saw as a figure of safety, one that would protect them from the evils of the world, was now the one that would cause their demise.
No pony will be coming to help you. Not the elements of harmony, not your parents, not the princesses themselves. Why would they come and help pathetic excuses of ponies like yourself? So stupid that's even kind of funny.
Rainbow Dash continues to cackle and laugh at the foals.
But I'm not Pinkie Pie. Now is not the time for jokes.
What are you gonna do to us?
One of the other foals ask, the questions spreading like wildfire among the group.
Well, normally I would tell you, but I think there is someone else who can. How exciting, a special guest.
She twists around, looking at the guards and pointing towards Thornbred. Two of the guards fly down, hovering just beside Thornbred. Everything was still fuzzy and distant from being knocked unconscious. The shock from seeing Rainbow Dash was hardly helping. All he could do was watch as the floor falls away from him as the guard picks him up and takes him to the catwalk above. He'd only see a few more details now that he was up close, the set of doors lining the catwalk above the PEGASUS device, the window looking into the room. He couldn't see what or who was there, it was far too dark for that. He'd only assume it was where the controls for the PEGASUS was. Finally, the guards. Number 56, 32, and guard 12. They hadn't changed at all.
Normally, fully grown stallions and mares aren't included, but once in a while we get lucky.
Rainbow Dash smiles as Thornbred is brought in front of her. It was twisted and unstable, a smile of a mare who had truly lost her mind. The guards placed him in a pair of shackles hanging down from the ceiling above the mouth of the PEGASUS. They were tight around his wrists, clearly meant for holding the much smaller foals below, as they were lowered down into the machine. The weight of his body pulled downwards on the metal as the guards let go of him, causing his bones and tendons to ache.
You were so desperate to know what happens here, so why don't you tell them all?
She spins Thornbred around, allowing him to look downwards towards the foals.
No!
Thornbred yelled out, grunting with each movement that he made as the metal shackles continued to dig into his flesh.
No.
Rainbow Dash's smile refuses to fade, full of joy and excitement for the process that was to come.
Come on! They'll figure it out soon enough. Save yourself the pain of failure. No! I'm not letting them suffer at your hoof anymore.
Thornbred snarls out, beginning to struggle against his restraints, every forceful tug sending a shock of pain through him. Luckily, he could use his wings to alleviate some of the strain by flying upwards towards the ceiling. Rainbow Dash let out a sigh, holding out her wing as the guard to her right handed her a stun baton. With a swift thrust forward, she jammed the two spike points into Thornbred's back, right between his wings. The stun was enough to stop Thornbred's attempted flight, with a loud clank of the chains and a whimper from Thornbred. He was left hanging by his front hooves once more. Rainbow Dash spun around to face her.
Well, if you're not going to tell them to prevent them from suffering.
Rainbow Dash speaks mockingly, rolling her eyes at Thornbred's idea of mercy.
Then maybe you'll tell them to stop hers.
And with that, alongside a stomp of her hoof, two more guards walk out of an unmarked door. Dragging on the floor behind them was Azure.
Azure?
Thornbred gasped out. Azure was noticeably bruised all over her body. She clearly had received a beating from whatever guards brought her here.
Hey, Thornbred.
Azure chuckles slightly as she is dropped down next to Rainbow Dash.
We found this one sneaking into 7R. How fortunate that you two just so happen to be here at the same time.
Rainbow Dash chuckles as she poises above Azure's back, a hoof resting on her shoulder.
Do you want to tell him now?
Thornbred looks to Azure, then back to the foals beneath him.
Azure.
Thornbred looks back at his friend, the only friend he had in this place. I'm sorry. He looked back to Rainbow Dash scowling.
No, I am not telling them. This shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't be doing this. Aren't you supposed to protect Equestria, not endanger some of its most vulnerable residents for some stupid rainbows?
Rainbow Dash shrugs, smiling as she looks down at Azure.
Fine. This will be fun.
And with that, Rainbow Dash jams the end of the baton into Azure's neck, the crackling of electricity being quickly accompanied with the shrill screams from Azure as her muscles twitch and contract, causing her to stiffen like a board.
No! Stop!
Thornbred yells, looking down at Azure. Rainbow Dash laughs once more, yelling out over the screams.
Tell them! Tell these foals how they're going to die!
The screaming stops, and everything falls silent once more. The baton is moved away from the gasping and spluttering Azure.
Azure,
Thornbred once again looks down towards the foals.
Don't do what she tells you to, Thornbred.
I've been hit with lightning before. Rainbow Dash snarls out.
You want to act all strong and tough? Well, let's see how well you deal with this.
Rainbow Dash snarls as she bites into the top of Azure's wing. She stomps her front hooves into her shoulders and tugs backwards, causing a sickening pop as the wing is pulled out of place. Once again, Azure screams, her hooves scraping against the metal catwalk as she tries to pull herself away. Thornbred watches on in disgust at the scene unfolding in front of him. All he can do is try and convince the ever-deteriorating Rainbow Dash to stop.
All this pointless suffering, and for what? Rainbows? All those foals' lives lost, all of them, and just for some stupid rainbows.
Rainbow Dash continues to smirk, pulling harder and harder on the now dislocated wing. Rainbow Dash continues to smirk, pulling harder and harder on the now dislocated wing. She would have some sort of snarky response, if it wasn't for the mass of feathers and flesh in her jaws. Thornbred continues to try and persuade Rainbow Dash to stop. It's all he can do in his current position. Well, except stop her from doing so by telling the foals their fate. But looking down at them, those dozens of wide-eyed foals, all similar to his sister, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Soon enough, some form of silence returns. Rainbow Dash backs away, Azure's wing held in between her teeth like a dog with a bone. She throws it below, amongst the watching foals.
Never done that to an adult pony before. But there's a first for everything. Even better that it's on scum like you.
Rainbow Dash chuckles out as she returns back to Azure's side, taking place above her remaining wing. Azure doesn't speak this time, instead just panting and whining on the floor. The pain was still apparent. Having a wing ripped off was hardly a painless procedure. At least it had peaked, and was now lessening.
You're both embarrassments to Cloudsdale. You know that, right? Both Pegasi that can't listen to simple orders. Maybe you don't deserve to be Pegasi at all.
She smirks as she bites down once more on Azure's other wing, beginning a long and painful process of removing it.
What's the point of this all? What does harming every Pegasi here accomplish? What does hurting Azure accomplish?
Thornbred continues to speak through Azure's screams. Rainbow Dash grunts out as she finally pulls the remaining wing off of Azure's back, leaving two bleeding stumps in their place. As previously, she throws the dismembered wing below amongst the foals, causing more cries and screams to arise at the sight of the bloodied appendage.
The pain makes good spectra. The suffering makes good spectra. You will never understand the amount of time it takes to get this process this perfect.
She chuckles, bending down to look at Azure's face. The blue mare's eyelids were drooping downwards into a closed state. The pain had gotten too much to bear for Azure.
And you'll never know how much I enjoy the looks on their faces.
Rainbow Dash stands once more, leaving Azure and standing in front of Thornbred instead.
And I'll make sure that you suffer. An example to all the foals and fillies down there who believe they can make a difference. That any failure or traitor could make a difference. How am I the traitor? You are the one who has killed Celestia and knows how many foals. How am I a traitor for wanting to protect them?
Thornbred yells out as Rainbow Dash looks towards one of the guards, a wide smirk across her face. The guard disappears through one of the doorways.
Tell me, how many times have you saved Equestria? How many horrors and monsters have you had to fight?
She states with a smirk. It was true. Rainbow Dash had saved Equestria more times than any pony could really count, but it was still hardly a way to justify the happenings inside the Rainbow Factory.
Do you think you're above me? Above the rest of us with your fancy suit? How about we bring you back down to where the rest of your kind are?
She scowls as the guard returns from their brief leave through the doorway, their wing wrapped around a small black bag. They set it down next to Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash smirks once more, grabbing onto the open front of Thornbred's jacket and pulling it down off of him with her wings, before swiftly moving onto his shirt, ripping it open and taking it off similarly to the jacket.
From what I've been told, you rarely ever take these off. Seems everyone here is seeing a rare sight.
Thornbred whines as he feels the cold air hit against his bare fur and chest. It was an experience that was so familiar to others, yet so alien and strange to him.
The Pegasi that tried to make a difference, stripped down to nothing except for the traitor they have become. You could save yourself the embarrassment,
she states as she looks towards the foals once more. The offer of saving his dignity by telling the foals that they are going to die was still on the table. No. Thornbred whines out. Despite the rising levels of discomfort and embarrassment, he wasn't going to break now. He wasn't going to let them know. At least until they had to find out.
And how about your cutie mark? Something that so many ponies display with pride, so many foals desire, something that you keep hidden away.
She smiles, pulling off the last piece of clothing, Thornbred's trousers, and throwing them to the side. Thornbred whines once more, his entire body exposed to the world. Exposed to all those foals, exposed to Rainbow Dash and the guards, exposed to whatever was behind that window. But most importantly, his cutie mark. A notepad with a simplistic diagram of a brain drawn onto it. Thornbred remained speechless, not wanting to give Rainbow Dash any kind of satisfaction from her constant insults and taunting. The overwhelming embarrassment stained his face red and caused his wings to instinctively move downwards and wrap around his body, hiding himself. It was weird. Even he had to admit it. It was hardly unusual to see a pony in this state. Most were like it constantly. Just for him, it was not a position he was often in.
Traitors like you don't deserve to hide anything.
Rainbow Dash reaches for the baton once more, thrusting it into the now exposed fur on Thornbred's chest.
Traitors like you deserve nothing.
Thornbred lets out a shrill scream, the pain breaking his lack of communication. His wings extend outwards to reveal his body, the shock completely taking over any control that he had of his limbs. Rainbow Dash continued to press the baton against Thornbred. He couldn't tell for how long. It could have been several seconds. It could have been minutes. If he didn't know any better, it could have been days. The pain clouded his mind and his perception of reality. The shock eventually faded, allowing Thornbred's aching muscles and wings to go limp once more, leaving him hanging and panting out as he tried to regain his composure. Rainbow Dash looked over the sea of foals, using the baton to point at Thornbred.
This is what happens when you try to make a difference. This is what happens when you try to be a hero. This is what happens.
She looks towards Thornbred, a smirk across her face.
When you think you are anything more than just a failure. And failures deserve to suffer.
Rainbow Dash yells out as she swings the baton to Thornbred's side with a dull thwack and a thump. Again. And again. And again. The room was filled with cries and whimpers from Thornbred, accompanied by the thudding and cracking as the baton hit against his flesh, breaking ribs and bones in the process. All any pony could do was watch. Rainbow Dash had proven what she could do when challenged, and none of the foals below wanted to take the risk of ending up like Thornbred.
Thornbred could only take the beating, feeling his torso, legs and arms hit over and over again, his flesh bruising and bones shattering. The pain throbbed throughout his body, spreading like a fire in a barn, all the way from his hooves to his head. Eventually it was too much to bear. His eyelids drooped and his body stopped reacting. He hung there limp, barely alive. Rainbow Dash was right. Thornbred had failed. The control console was blinking as he watched onward at the blue mare beating Thornbred within an inch of his life. He had witnessed this all before, the killing of foals and mares alike, even having seen his own sister fall to the PEGASUS device. He became numb to the experience after a while, but this was different. After Scootaloo had been processed, Rainbow Dash had become a lot more violent, making more torturous requests to the guards and mechanics alike. Everyone knew it was her way of dealing with the pain from Scootaloo. But the death of a loved one, a family member or friend, was hardly an excuse to do what she was doing. Barnshed would know. He watched onward, flinching at every dull hit against Thornbred's torso, the purplish red spreading across his skin. He hoped it wouldn't have come to this, but it was the nature of 7R. Those who try often end up in this situation. It's what happened to his sister after all. She was only trying to help her brother, find out what was causing him to retreat from their talks and meetings. She felt the same way. He wouldn't allow it to happen again. Rainbow Dash eventually stopped, huffing and panting as the baton falls to her side with a loud clank.
And now, you'll get what you deserve. What you all deserve.
She turned towards the glass, nodding at Barnshed. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was there. It was her way of saying, lower the foal, or in this case, Thornbred. He had done it many times before. It was a small lever on the control panel. Just pulling it downwards would end the life of whoever was bound to those shackles. Barnshed would usually do it, no questions asked. There was never any question. His hoof raised upwards like it had a million times before. This time, however, he hesitated. There were many buttons, some of which were hardly ever used, going from draining the Spectra tanks to even reversing the direction of the blades inside the machine. But there was one that had never been used. Emergency stop. It was under a small glass panel to prevent it from being pressed accidentally, designed in such a way where breaking the glass was the only way to stop the machine quickly. Barnshed could only assume that it was to deter any mechanics from pressing it when their morality got in the way. That's if the threat of death wasn't already enough. His hoof swiftly moved over, slamming down on the glass, causing it to break. There was a loud buzzer as a dim red light sprung on, illuminating both the control room and the production room. The whirring of the machine ground to a halt. Rainbow Dash scowled at the realization of what had been done. He had done it. For the first time, he had stopped the PEGASUS from taking a life instead of enabling it to do so. This was followed by a wave of relief. He had finally done the right thing, listening to his moral compass instead of locking it deep away within his mind. This feeling didn't last long, however. Quickly there were hooves wrapped around his front legs as guards pulled him towards the door to the production room. He was brought face to face with Rainbow Dash. She looked angry, which is an understatement for how the mare felt. She was furious.
Barnshed, what do you think you're doing? I told you to drop this filth.
She stomped closer, her nose inches away from Barnshed. Thornbred is right. All the suffering you are causing. Is it really worth it?
You're listening to him. One of the failures, a traitor. What happened to your loyalty? Loyalty to the factory, loyalty to Cloudsdale, loyalty to me.
She snarled, pointing and gesturing with her hoof. I am loyal. Loyal to those I care about. To Equestria. To my sister. He blankly stared. He knew Rainbow Dash knew what happened to his sister. She was the one who watched as she screamed for her life, as her body was blended and ground up into Spectra.
Your sister was nothing more than a traitor. Just like Thornbred here, just like Azure. You're risking everything for these disgraces to our city.
They aren't a disgrace. They're doing what's right, what should be done. The disgrace here is you, Rainbow. Rainbow Dash fell silent, staring onwards to Barnshed with a frown, processing what had been said to her. She swung her hoof at Barnshed, punching him in the side of the head before pushing him off the edge of the catwalk with her wing, right over the mouth of the Pegasus. He grabbed onto the edge of his wings and front hooves.
Go get another engineer to start the Pegasus again,
Rainbow Dash commanded towards the guards. Rainbow Dash stomped down on one of his wingtips that was supporting his body.
Who else would do what I do? Who else?
Barnshed gasps out as his wingtip is crushed under Rainbow's hoof, causing him to slip slightly. Luckily his grip with the remaining appendages remained strong. For how long was unknown. Rainbow Dash raised her hoof once more, stomping down on Barnshed's other wing.
You wouldn't! You can barely press a button on a console without having to question everything. You can't even follow basic orders.
He slipped once more, closer and closer into falling into the Pegasus. Even when inactive, the fall would definitely hurt. And who knows how long until it becomes active once again.
And now, you're going to end up just like your sister. We can always replace ponies like you. There are hundreds waiting for a position like yours.
She raised her hoof again, slamming it down onto Barnshed's right hoof, leaving him hanging there by just a single appendage.
Good riddance.
Rainbow Dash smirked, ready to doom Barnshed to his death. The guards had remained still up until this point, hardly moving unless directly told to do so by Rainbow Dash. Two of the guards had left under the command to get another engineer. This left the final guard, seeing the scene unfold in front of them from their tinted gas mask. They didn't care. They had personally aided in the death of thousands of foals, even handling whatever remained of them in the form of spectral paint. Hell, they were even the one who predicted what colours they would produce. But for once in their time here, through all the death and suffering, a thought entered their head. A single action that could be taken to end this all, to prove that they were more than just a cog in a machine, to allow them to take control. Guard 12 knew what they had to do. Without warning, Guard 12 sprung forward, tackling Rainbow Dash, causing both her and Guard 12 to fall over the edge into the Pegasus. Guard 12 focused on Rainbow Dash's wings, trying to pin them to her sides. It would be fruitless just to push her off. She could easily just fly once again. Guard 12 hit the machine first, continuing to hold tightly onto Rainbow Dash's wings. Rainbow Dash took a second to respond, clearly still figuring out what had happened.
What is wrong with you all? Do you even know what you are doing? What you are trying to accomplish, or is this all some stupid game?
Rainbow Dash yelled out as she began to hit against Guard 12, mainly aiming for the face. One lucky hit ended up shattering the lens, piercing into Guard 12's left eye. Despite the pain from the hits, Guard 12 kept a grip on Rainbow Dash, rolling her over and pinning her down against the machine to further aid in restricting her chances to escape. They both knew that if they didn't get away, they'd be pulled into the Pegasus once the machine was activated. The only difference was Guard 12 was willing to sacrifice themselves to end it all. They always wanted to be known for their work, and whilst this wasn't the same as being a famous painter, being a famous hero that killed the head of the Rainbow Factory was close enough. Azure had gained consciousness. All she could see was the bruised and broken body of Thornbred dangling from the shackles, alongside the much healthier looking Barnshed holding on for his life. She slowly rose to her hooves, stumbling over and offering a hoof to Barnshed. She didn't know who he was, but knowing that below was certain death was enough to make her want to save him. With her assistance, Barnshed was up on the catwalk once more. Are you okay?" Azure wheezed out, whining with the pain from her wing stumps. Barnshed nods, looking downwards at Guard 12 and Rainbow Dash with a shocked expression on his face. I'll be fine. I have something I must do. I will lower your friend down so you can help them." He looked towards Thornbred, before galloping off back to the control room, ready to exact his plan, whatever that may be. Azure looks downward, confused at what is going on. The day had been confusing and disorientating to say the least. She had snuck into 7R to try and help Thornbred with his work, especially how rainbows were made. She had found out, mainly through some of the documents she had found in the offices of the managers of this section. It was horrifying to find out what rainbows were made out of. Almost upsetting that she'd been working so close to something so horrific for so long. All the time and effort she had spent getting into her position was now irrelevant, being completely undermined by the horrors of Subsection 7R. Very few creatures would do this. Not even Chrysalis or Discord would have stepped to be this cruel. Then she found herself here. She could only assume that the guards had hit her really hard after getting caught. Clearly, they were capable of that, and brought her here to be the next victim of the device. Just like the foals. Just like Thornbred. There wasn't much time to think about the situation, however. The chains holding up Thornbred clanked and rattled as he was slowly lowered downwards, stopping just in front of Azure. Usually she would have just flown up to help him, but that was hardly an option anymore. She lifted herself up onto her hind legs, grabbing Thornbred by the shoulders and gently shaking him, being careful to avoid the bruises all over his body. "Thornbred, can you hear me? Wake up!" Thornbred's ears picked up the sound first. That voice sounded like Azure. Were they dead? Was this some kind of afterlife? He was never one to believe in such things, but finding out there was one was a pleasant surprise at least. Seeing Azure again would be nice. But then the pain once again spread across his body. The smell flooded his nostrils, the noises of foals whimpering and crying. He wasn't dead. He was still hanging from the ceiling by his arms. It was both a good and bad realization. It was good as no other foals had died. No one else had died yet. He still had a chance to stop this all, and save the lives of all the foals of Cloudsdale. To save his sister's life. On the other hoof, the broken bones and bruises hurt like no other pain he'd ever felt. He knew that treatment for his injuries wouldn't be available unless this was stopped. What happened? Thornbred whined out, opening his eyes to look at Azure. "We are getting you out of here! We are getting out of here!" Thornbred looks around as Azure fiddles with his shackles. It would be a lot quicker for her to do with the more dexterous wings. The first things that he noticed was the lack of Rainbow Dash, or the guards. They were seemingly alone in this room. He looked downwards towards the foals, seeing that they were all still there, watching onwards as Azure unshackled him. Then he saw the squabble between Rainbow Dash and the guard. The number on their side was clear. It was Guard 12. Guard 12. They had changed. They were fighting Rainbow Dash. They had to have changed their view on Subsection 7R at least a small bit. The two were still fighting. Rainbow Dash still punching and kicking Guard 12 as hard as she could. It was impressive that Guard 12 hadn't let go, or even budged. They were taking the beating and hoping that it would provide enough time for the others to escape. What about Rainbow Dash? He whines as he feels the shackles loosen. Azure grabs onto Thornbred, pulling him forward onto the catwalk. Thornbred was glad that she did. He was unsure that he could even fly with his current injuries. I don't know, but it's best not to think about it, right? We can get out of here. Tell every pony. Tell Celestia. Azure smiles, looking towards the door that Barnes had left through. But the foals, what about them? If we die here, then they will too, and all the ones to come. Azure whines, gently tugging on Thornbred's arm to urge him to move forward, to run out of here with her to whichever pony would listen. If we tell Celestia, then no more foals will die. Thornbred sighed, bowing his head. There were very few other options to take. He wouldn't be able to fight Rainbow Dash, or any pony else. The only hope here was running. Even if it meant sacrificing the foals and Guard 12 in the process. There was a loud clanking noise and a distant whirring, as the red emergency lighting began to fade. Neither Thornbred nor Azure knew what this meant. But Rainbow Dash certainly did. She stopped punching at Guard 12, beginning to violently thrash against their grip. Don't you understand? We will both die here if you don't let go of me! Is that really what you want? Guard 12 lets out a sigh, remaining their silent self, even in the face of this situation. You idiot! You're all stupid idiots! Let me go! Rainbow Dash continued to scream as the blades of the machine slowly began to turn. She was safe for now as she could wiggle out of their grip, but once they began to go faster, she had no hope of escaping the gruesome fate that awaited her. Guard 12 didn't let go. They knew what this meant. They knew that they wouldn't be getting out of this situation alive. It was worth it. Thornbred watched onward, feeling fear and worry wash over his body. Guard 12 may have made mistakes, made many wrong choices to get up to this point, but he knew that they were just misguided, that they had much to share with the world. They just lacked the ability to do so. He wasn't going to let anyone else here die, and that included them. Thornbred approached the edge, opening his wings. Before Azure could intervene with his plans, he jumped off, fighting against the pain of his injuries as he flew down to save Guard 12. The blades began to spin faster and faster, beginning to slice both Rainbow Dash's and Guard 12's skin, exposing the red meat underneath. Thornbred wouldn't have long, maybe 10 seconds at best, to lift Guard 12 out of the machine. He wrapped his hooves around Guard 12's waist, beginning to try and pull them upwards. If it was any other Pegasi, this would be trivial. They are light and easy to carry, but Guard 12 was not a Pegasi. The fact that they were an Earth pony made this task infinitely more difficult due to the extra weight. Maybe some stronger flyers, like the Wonderbolts, wouldn't have been able to, but Thornbred wasn't a strong flyer normally, let alone now. Rainbow Dash grunted as one of her back hooves got pulled into the machine blades, slowly tugging her legs and eventually her body inside. Unless the machine was stopped, she was going to die here. If these were to be her final moments, she could only think of one thing. Not forgiveness or guilt, but revenge. She tightened her grip on Guard 12.
You!
She yelled at Thornbred.
This is all your fault! You're gonna take away everything I've worked so hard for just because of your stupid morality! Do you really think this is gonna change anything? Another pony will take my place!
Her attention shifted to Guard 12.
And you're not getting away. You're gonna die here. I'll make sure of it.
Thornbred continued to flap upwards, feeling himself being pulled into the machine alongside Guard 12 and Rainbow Dash. He could hear the sickening crunches and squelches as the machine tore chunks out of Rainbow Dash's legs. As more and more of Rainbow Dash disappeared inside the machine, Guard 12 followed, one of their legs being pulled in too. Thornbred was safe for now, but much longer and he would suffer the same. Rainbow Dash was clearly worse for wear, as the machine ate her legs and was moving up to her torso, flicking out pieces of skin and flesh onto the surrounding metal. She had begun to splutter and cough, blood dripping down her chin, her yelling turning into a strained gurgle of words.
You killed one of the elements of harmony. Every pony will hate you. No one will forgive you. You won't forgive yourself.
Guard 12 shakes their head. No one will forgive you for what you have done here. Guard 12 let go of Rainbow Dash, allowing her to fall further and further into the machine. As Thornbred began to slowly ascend away from the bloodied blades, he saw what remained of Rainbow Dash get pulled deeper and deeper, eventually ending with her head getting pulverized between the blades. She was dead. Thornbred dropped down next to the Pegasus device among the foals, dropping Guard 12 down first before collapsing next to them. He had won. He had succeeded. He had ended the reign of Rainbow Dash in the Rainbow Factory. Without the danger and urgency, Thornbred felt the exhaustion and pain set in. He'd only lay there and pant, waiting for some pony to come and help him. He looked over to Guard 12. They had set up the best they could, looking over the bloodied and mangled stump that was once their right leg. He knew they needed help. Most of them did. Almost every pony here would need some sort of counselling or medical treatment after this event. But he couldn't do that now. He could only gasp and stare as the foals began to approach. His eyes began to close. The last thing in his vision was the Pegasus device. Its spectra vats now filled to the brim with vibrant spectra. Thornbred woke up in a room. It was strangely alien yet familiar to him, like he had visited this place long ago but had forgotten. He was in a bed. The darkness around him made it impossible to see much more. His body still ached, but it was a lot better than before. The smell of death had faded, replaced with disinfectant. Was this a hospital? Hello? He croaked out, pushing himself up with his front hooves. He didn't know if anyone would answer him. Hello? He yelled out once more. A nearby door opened, allowing light to spill into the room. The walls were blue with a brown trim. A pony entered the room. They were white with a pink mane and a nurse's cap. She quickly trots in, pulling open the curtains nearby to light up the room more efficiently. "Oh, you're awake. We didn't expect you to wake up this early." She smiles, trotting over to Thornbred's side. "How are you feeling?" Thornbred looked around, now able to see much more of the room around him. He was right. He was in hospital. Must have been the one in Ponyville. I'm fine. What happened? How did I get here? Where is Azure? Are the foals alright? What about Guard 12? Shh. The nurse smiles, gently patting Thornbred's head. Azure is fine. Don't stress too much. You need the rest. You were in a real state when you came in. It took our finest doctors a while to fix you up. Thornbred looked downward, pulling the blanket off of himself. It was true. There were bandages across much of his torso and some of his wrists. Can I see Azure? Is she able to come and visit? Thornbred asked, pulling the blanket over himself once more. He was still nude, and despite all that had happened, it still made him extremely uncomfortable. We can ask her, although it is up to her, of course. Just wait here, okay? Thornbred nods, sighing as he leans back once more, moving his wings to either side to avoid crushing them under himself. The nurse left, closing the door and locking it. Thornbred felt strange around the situation. Was it normal to lock a patient's door like that? In his experience, sometimes it was needed if they were likely to try and escape. But he wasn't. It was strange. Time went by. Again, he could hardly tell how long it had been, probably an hour or so, before the door unlocked once more. The nurse walked in, followed by the familiar blue pony Azure. She had bandages wrapped around her torso too. Azure! Thornbred jolted up, wincing as the pain shot through his body. Hey, Thornbred! Glad to see you're awake. I was worried you might never wake up. Azure trotted over, sitting down next to Thornbred's bed. I'll give you two some privacy. The nurse pony smiled, trotting out of the room once again and locking it. What do you mean? How long has it been? What happened? Thornbred asked, shuffling to face Azure. Well, after you passed out, we carried you out of the factory. Once we got out, well, it wasn't long until some pony had gotten help from a nearby hospital. Then we brought you here. You've been asleep for a while. Maybe a couple of days? She smiled at Thornbred. Days? And what about the foals? Guard 12, how are they doing? Thornbred struggled to keep a consistent train of thought. There was so much to discuss, so much to find out. It was hard to keep on track. Well, you did take one hell of a beating. You could barely move, Azure chuckles. As for the foals, they're okay. A bit shaken up, but they're okay. Most got sent home. Well, except for one. Poor guy broke his leg. And Guard 12? Oh! They're still here. Lost a leg, apparently. It's been hard to find them because I don't know what their name is. Neither did I. I just wanted to thank them. You know, for doing the right thing. If any pony should be thanked, it's you. You not only stopped Rainbow Dash, but carried a fully grown mare with several broken ribs. Thornbred looked away from Azure. He was never one to receive compliments well. Most of the time it made him embarrassed to a degree. So, she's dead? Well, I didn't see much, but I can only assume. Silence falls between the two. Rainbow Dash being dead was difficult to hear. Even if they had both discovered she was hardly the pure-hearted heroic mare that everyone knew her as, she was still somewhat a hero. And Barnshed, the mechanic. He went to Canterlot. Probably tell the princesses about what happened. Good. Has anything come of that yet? Well, the princesses are planning an investigation. Talk to us, the weather ponies, look around the factory, that kind of thing. They won't need to look for long. Thornbred smiles. I'm sorry about what happened to your wings. How do they feel now? Nah, I've been through worse. Azure smiles as she turns slightly, showing off the 2 bumps under the bandages where her wing nubs are. Really? You can't fly anymore? What about your job at the weather factory? Well, I'm not sure really if I want to go back. Don't get me wrong, I love the weather and everything to do with it, but after what we saw, I don't think I could anymore. Thornbred nodded. The images that he had seen, the stories he had been told, he doubted that he would be forgetting them anytime soon, if he ever would at all. What about you? Azure added, a smile returning to her face. Well, I'm probably going to go back to Manhattan to continue my study. Hell, maybe this entire experience helped me understand a few things. Thornbred smiled. The experience of near-death and sadness wasn't one that was pleasant to explore, but it provided an experience that would not only aid him, but possibly prepare him for the future. It was useful in a way. I was kind of hoping you'd stay around here a while. I wouldn't mind hanging out again. Maybe I will, I'll see. I doubt I'll be leaving for a while with all this. Once again, Thornbred looks downwards, gesturing to the mass of bandages. It would take weeks, maybe a month or 2, for things to completely heal, and that's just a physical. Mentally overcoming this would take a whole while longer. Yeah, she really did a number on you, huh? There was a knock on the door at this point. Both Thornbred and Azure turned to face the noise. It was terrifying almost. Whilst it was probably the nurse or some other doctor pony, there was still the fear that a guard or scientist would walk through the door, ready to hurt them, or kidnap them both and take them back to the PEGASUS device. The factory was a very powerful facility. It wouldn't be surprising if they had connections to everywhere in Equestria. Azure sheepishly trotted towards the door, unlocking it and opening it. Hello? Behind the door was a grey mare, purple mane and tail. They had a bandage wrapped around their left eye, and were sat in a wheelchair, one leg being completely missing. Hello. Thornbred didn't recognise the pony at first. They looked strange compared to the others. A stocky snout and a general build with the most unique green eyes, similar to the ones you would see on a reptile. But the voice was the one part he recognised. He sat up in his seat, eyes wide. Guard 12? She nodded, a dull look on her face. Yes, although I do think it's more appropriate to call me by my name. My position wasn't exactly a positive one. Of course! Thornbred smiled, looking at Azure and nodding. Azure was confused at the entire situation, turning back and forth between the two. Thornbred looked at Guard 12 once more, the smile slowly fading as he realised that Guard 12 had never given their name. Well, what? What is your name? Peggy Framehold. Well, nice to finally be meeting you without the gas mask on. Or the uniform. Thornbred smiled once more. Peggy wheeled herself over, closing the door behind her as she does. It's strange, having ponies be able to see my face, but I'm sure I'll get used to it. I mean, when was the last time you left the factory? I don't think I ever saw a guard walk out. Not at least through the front door. Azure added, shuffling over to allow Peggy to sit amongst the group. I haven't left since I started working there. The world has changed so much since I last saw it. I think you've also changed a lot since then too. Thornbred smiles, leaning forward. I knew you were a good pony, one that would choose the right choice. Thank you for, well, saving us. I hope it's given you some hope yourself. About the future? It's given me a different outlook. I am in control of me, not a factory higher-up or the Cantalot ponies. I am in control of what I do. That is what I have learned. We have all learned a lot. Maybe Twilight will having us writing letters to Celestia. Azure chuckled, smiling at the two new friends she had made. Celestia will hear all about it, I'm sure, but not right now. How about we relax? Get something to eat like we used to. Thornbred nods towards Azure with a smile. I'm starving. You were asleep for a while. Only if you can walk that far, though, and handle not having clothes on. The bandages make me feel a bit more comfortable. All I can do is try. Thornbred slowly pushed himself up and out of the bed. Standing on his hooves at first hurt as his muscles contracted and moved, somewhat pulling the bruised and damaged flesh and bone. Eventually the feeling became manageable. You coming with us, Peggy? Peggy only nodded, turning the wheelchair around towards the door. I assume that means a yes? Azure commented, glancing at Peggy then towards Thornbred for an answer. Peggy was never one to speak much. Who knows, maybe that's something that will change? Thornbred smiles, looking at Peggy instead, suggesting that she answers Azure's question instead of himself. Yes, talking is not my specialty. I didn't used to talk much during work, so I never did at all. Let's go eat. Azure and Thornbred both smiled as they followed Peggy to the door. They took their time, mainly so Thornbred wouldn't push himself too hard or get left behind. The last thing they would want is him getting hurt once more. Azure opened the door. She was the one that was least injured, so she took on the task of doing anything physical, at least when the others wanted the help. The walk was reminiscent of the one that Thornbred used to do between his room in Subsection 7R and the main factory cafeteria. Many corridors with lots of turns and pathways, with medical ponies walking around from pony to pony. This time, however, they were much more friendly, waving and saying hello to them as they walked past. Even the other patients were friendly, despite what condition they were faced with. It's almost as if the events of Subsection 7R never happened. It was refreshing to see the world still had niceness to it. Before long, they ended up in the canteen. It was a lot smaller than the factory one, presumably because most patients got their food in their room instead of going to get it themselves. This left many of the tables empty and free for taking. At this point in the journey, Thornbred had gotten tired. The constant struggling against the pain that he felt was enough to tire him out from a walk that he would usually easily be able to do. This led him to take a seat at the nearest table, with no real thought behind it. Azure and Peggy followed suit. So, what are you two feeling? They have a lot of options here. Azure asked the two others, offering to go get their food for them. Anything. I don't mind. Thornbred panted out. He would eat anything at this point, even if it tasted disgusting. It would be better than nothing. He ended up lying on the table, eyes closed as he rested. Soup, Peggy answered, expressionless as per usual. Alright, I'll be right back. A moment of silence passed between the two. Peggy wasn't the most communicative pony, and Thornbred was exhausted. It wasn't awkward by any means, but a conversation would be nice. Thornbred? Yeah? Peggy hesitated, mouth agape as they questioned what they were saying, if it was a good time or the right thing to do. Thank you for believing in me. Not many have done that. If it was not for you, I would still be painting with foal's blood. Thornbred leant backwards, scowling. It was unexpected. He'd only seen Peggy emotional once, and it wasn't for the right reason. Her doing it of her own accord, it was sweet, showing some level of trust. The comment of foal's blood also shook him a bit too. You don't need to thank me. I thought you were a heartless monster for a while, you know? But what you said to me, that the whole of Equestria is wrong. Thornbred sat up, looking at Peggy. I realised that you did what you did, because no one had ever encouraged or supported you. You weren't evil, just angry at the world. I'm worried. Worried about what Celestia will say. What the royalty will say about my role in the production of rainbows. I am no different to any other guard or scientist. Peggy's voice shook, showing emotion, worrying concern, perhaps even sadness at what might be done to her. She was not afraid of losing everything before, because she had nothing to lose. But now, she did have something. A future. And she didn't want to let that go just yet. I'm sure they'll understand. You did save Barnshed. Without you, we never would have stopped this all. They've got to give you credit for that. I hope. So, what now? You're free to do what you want, right? What do you think you'll do? My talent is art. Animation. Peggy flexed her remaining leg, showing off her cutie mark. A film reel and a paintbrush in red. Oh, that's the new one, right? Haven't seen much of it around yet. You can go back to doing that? I don't know.
art meant so much to me. But now it has been tainted. Peggy looked downward, an air of sadness around her.
Yeah, well, no one is making you continue. If you enjoy it, then why not? You're free to do what you want.
Thornbred smiles, placing a hoof on Peggy's shoulder to try and reassure her of her newfound choices in life. Peggy fell silent, followed by Thornbred. They could only wait for Azure to return. Not too long later, the clink of plates on the table was heard as Azure placed down 2 soup bowls and a few slices of cheesecake.
The chef said that soup is best for you, Thornbred. Something about being gentle on the stomach. I don't know, but I also got us some cheesecake.
Thank you, Azure. Thornbred smiled once more. It was forced over the discomfort he was feeling, but it was legitimate nonetheless. Peggy simply began to eat. She was thankful for the food, but just didn't know how exactly to express that. Azure took seat next to the two, eating the cheesecake that she got. The meal went past in mostly silence, everyone just taking the time to relax. Most things had been talked about, everyone doubted that they would want to relive the recent events so soon. It was better for all if they just chilled. Before any of them could realise, however, the cafeteria had become surprisingly busy. Many ponies, male, female, Pegasi, unicorn, earth, young and old, had begun to crowd around. Some were getting food, while some were just standing and looking around. Thornbred would have assumed that they were just visiting their friends or family. It would make sense. This was until one of them approached the group. This one was from the Crystal Empire, that distinctive crystal shape in their eyes. They had a blue coat and a grey mane, with a fedora on.
Hello there, I'm Inkblot. I'm with the Crystal Press. I just have a few questions to ask you. If you don't mind, that is.
It hit Azure and Thornbred at the same time. These were all press ponies. It became more obvious as they looked at the details. Almost every pony was holding a notebook and pen or a camera. Some had them hung around their necks, while some levitated them in the air with their magic, or held them with their wings. They were all here to ask questions. Information must have gotten out about what had happened once Barnshard had told Celestia. The press always had its way to get early access to such through informants or money. It was more concerning that they would ask this so soon.
Well,
Thornbred didn't really have an answer. He was normally the interviewer, not the interviewee. He didn't really want to answer all these questions for all these ponies. But alas, neither him nor Azure really wanted to disappoint them either. How about I tell you? Peggy grunted out. If you can stomach it. Weeks had passed since the incident in the Cloudsdale Weather Factory. Thornbred and Azure found themselves sat in the Royal Meeting Hall. It had been divided into 4 sections, one for the Royal Alicorns at the front, 2 side by side in the middle, and then a final one at the back for the herds of spectators and reporters, all wanting to document what was happening. Thornbred and Azure didn't want to be here in truth. They both had been attending therapy sessions, both mental and physical, after they had healed from their injuries. They were exhausted, but they had to be here. Equestria often didn't have these scenarios. Usually when something catastrophic happened, it was sorted out among the ponies involved. But this was different. Such a crime against pony kind couldn't go unaddressed by royalty. Thornbred and Azure were up next to speak. Whilst many news ponies had already published the statements and stories from the two in their respective newspapers, Celestia, Luna, Twilight and Cadence wanted to hear it from themselves. Even the elements of harmony were present. Well, all except for one. Across from Thornbred was Dr. Growhop and a selection of scientists and guards, including Peggy and Barnshed. They were surrounded by the royal guards. Even Echo and Nocturne were among them.
We meet here today to review the happenings of the Weather Factory, specifically the events that took place in Subsection 7R not too long ago.
Celestia spoke. Her voice was loud and stern, a stark contrast from her usual kind and caring demeanour.
Our first witness is Thornbred, a researcher who was among the foals that...
She paused. Being a princess for so long meant that she'd seen it all, from Discord to the Changelings to Bat Pony and Dragon Wars. But this was one she could have never expected.
That were next to fall fate to Rainbow Dash and the Rainbow Factory.
Thornbred trotted up into the centre of the room. He was still limping slightly from the injuries that he had sustained. He looked between the Alicorns, Celestia, Luna, Cadence.
They were stern-faced, a scowl that was unnerving from Celestia and Cadence. For Luna, it was a somewhat comforting slice of normality. She always looked stern compared to the others. Next was the elements of harmony. Twilight, Applejack, Rarity, Fluttershy, and Pinkie Pie. There was still space for one more. They all had varying looks on their face. Both Fluttershy and Pinkie Pie had their head bowed down, avoiding the looks of any pony in the room. Applejack was staring blankly out into the crowd. Hat nowhere to be seen. Rarity was fashionable as always, dressed in a dark black dress to reflect the seriousness of the scene. Twilight was very similar to the other alicorns, stern and serious. But unlike them, she had a noticeable tinge of sadness on her face. Then the factory staff. Crowhop, the scientists and guards, Peggy. They were watching him like hawks, disdain and anger across their faces. Peggy and Barnshed stuck out like sore hooves. They were relieved, almost happy at what had happened. They didn't deserve to be grouped together with the monsters that worked there. Then the crowd. There were ponies from all across Equestria, noticeably most from Cloudsdale. Two caught his eye, however. His mother and his sister were here. It made sense, of course. They knew what had happened, and wanted to be there for him. It just didn't make it any less worrying to see, especially his younger sister. Some of the things that would be said here would be enough to give a fully grown stallion nightmares, let alone a young filly like her. Before Thornbred knew it, he was stood on a little pedestal in the middle of the room. He had brought notes with him, a summary of what had happened and what he'd found out. If he was going to be testifying in front of every pony, he might as well be factual about what he is saying. I was called to the Weather Factory by Dr. Crowhop to address an ongoing pandemic known as Factory Stress Desaturation, a condition that affects those within Subsection 7R. Upon research and aid from Barnshed, I discovered that the process of making rainbows isn't quite as nice as we are told to believe. A machine known as the PEGASUS device would use the Pegasi that failed their flight exams as a resource, grinding them up and squeezing the components of rainbows out of them. Thornbred paused. He could hardly believe those words were true. They sounded like some old campfire story that brothers would tell their younger siblings to scare them. But it was true, every word of it. The crowd audibly gasped, some releasing stifled sobs and cries as he spoke. Among them was Fluttershy. She was a Cloudsdale pony herself, so Thornbred knew the pain she was going through. What she, and many like her, was once so proud of, was reduced to a painful ache in their minds. Those who developed factory stress desaturation were among those who were closely related with this process, he continued. But upon discovery of these facts, Dr. Crowhop sent me to be processed like the foals, alongside Azure who tried to do the same thing. We were faced with Rainbow Dash, overseer of Subsection 7R. She proceeded to torture both me and Azure, inflicting many wounds that will permanently change our lives. With help from Barnshed and Peggy, we were able to overpower Rainbow Dash, putting her in the mouth of the machine she used to kill so many foals before. Thornbred finished his speech, waiting for the response from the alicorns in front of him. Their stern looks have faded now, being replaced with looks of disgust and nausea. As for the elements, Pinkie Pie and Fluttershy began to sob loudly out. They were experiencing a lot. A loss of a friend is hard enough, but learning that they had a hoof in the murder of foals was another. Rarity was disgusted. Applejack and Twilight had just gone blank, unsure of what they were feeling and how to express it. Thornbred couldn't blame them. He hardly knew what he felt about the situation too. He doubted that any pony did. So, Rainbow Dash is no longer with us? Twilight croaked out. No, at least last I saw of her, what I saw wasn't something any pony could survive. Twilight bowed her head, her bangs perfectly hiding the tears that were beginning to build up in her eyes. Celestia nodded. Thank you, Thornbred. You can return to your seat. Our second witness is Azure, a Weather Factory employee that joined Thornbred among the foals destined for the Pegasus. Thornbred trotted back, glancing at Azure as they passed each other. Azure flashed a small smile, still being playful and happy despite what was going on around her. I've been working at the Weather Factory for almost my entire life. It's where I even got my cutie mark. I worked in the storm department, putting lightning into the clouds. I met Thornbred on his first day, introducing him to the Weather Factory and all that stuff. I talked to him every lunchtime in the canteen. Azure wasn't as prepared as Thornbred was, clearly just saying whatever she could remember instead of any kind of script. It was unprofessional, but Thornbred didn't think it would sound right that way. Azure had her way of speaking, and hearing it in its most raw form was the best way to, even if it was a bit rough around the edges.
But I noticed how unfairly they were treating him. I mean, how can you expect a stallion to solve an issue without all of the facts? So I snuck into Subsection 7R, got caught by the guards pretty quick. Next thing I know, I'm being dragged into this dark room, Thornbred hanging by his hooves in front of me, and Rainbow Dash to my right. She stomped on my back, holding me down as she shocked me with those stick things. Over and over again. Once more, gasps and cries from the crowds were heard over the thought of what had been done. The elements were all beginning to cry at this point. Hearing what their friend had done to those foals was bad enough, but hearing the torture that she had put Azure through was even worse. Before it was a job she had to do. Now it was something she enjoyed and took pride in doing. She then ripped my wings off. You don't deserve to be a Pegasus. Azure stifled tears herself. She was upset at the fact that she had lost her wings. Of course she was. It was something that would take years of her life to fully get used to again. She was essentially an earth pony at this point, except much lighter and weaker. Next Thornbred got beaten. I don't know exactly what broke, but I heard it. Every crack and crunch, I heard it all. I felt it too. Once Rainbow Dash was out of the way, I pulled him to safety. I carried him out of the weather factory afterwards. He didn't feel like a pony. The room once more falls silent, shock spreading across everyone in the room, except for the 7R staff themselves. Rainbow Dash, she wouldn't do that. I don't know how she would. Rarity whined out through the tears, it making her makeup run down her cheeks in black streaks. Applejack placed a hoof on her shoulder. I don't know either, but she ain't lying. Neither of them are. The truth ain't pretty, but it's the truth, Sugar Cube. Thank you, Azure. You may take a seat. Celestia nodded as she glanced towards Luna, who was scribing what had been said by all the witnesses. Our third witness is Barnshed, a former mechanic at Subsection 7R. Azure took her seat next to Thornbred as Barnshed trotted to the stand. I started working at the weather factory with my sister. She was standard staff, I was a rainbow mechanic. She got worried about me, so she decided to come and take a look. She ended up a Spectra. He sighed, holding the vial of Spectra he had shown Thornbred. Just as Thornbred would have if I didn't stop the machine, giving them time to, well, get rid of Rainbow Dash. Barnshed's speech was much shorter. None of the factory staff were very talkative, so it made sense that they would have less to say. It didn't help that Barnshed was inflicted with Factory Stress Desaturation either. For the record, Twilight asked, could you explain the production of rainbows? Foals are delivered after every flight exam. They are then fed into the Pegasus one by one, each producing spectra, which is assembled into rainbows in a different part of the factory. And the Pegasus is what exactly? A large machine. It grinds up, squeezes, and then filters the spectra out of ponies. We quickly discovered that the more pain inflicted by the process, the better the quality of spectra. Every pony was silent for a few seconds once more. It had been implied up until this point. They knew that foals were dying, but not exactly how. Hearing it so bluntly was no less of a shock, however. Thornbred even swore that he heard some pony vomiting somewhere in the room from the sheer disgust at what had happened. Who made this machine? I'm assuming it was one of the scientists. No pony knows. It's been there as long as Cloudsdale had been making rainbows. Just after I was banished to the moon, my sister gave up many of her duties to the ponies of Equestria. Earth ponies were in charge of maintaining the land. Unicorns were in charge of archival of information. Pegasi were in charge of the weather. Luna spoke out, her voice still dipping into her old Canterlot tone. Then, how many foals have been? Cadence whined. She was a parent herself. The thought of this happening to Flurryheart was enough to shake her to her very core. I believe the Wonderbolts have a record of flight exams since they started conducting them. Celestia sighed, knowing that list wasn't going to be a short one. Thank you, Barnshed. You can return to your seat. Our next witness is Peggy Framehold, a guard within Subsection 7R. Peggy walked up to the stand as Barnshed returned to his seat. Unlike the other guards, she was not in uniform, instead wearing only a blue collar. As for her injuries, she wore an eye patch over her left eye. The most noticeable part was the wooden prosthetic that was made for her right leg. If Peggy had been a Pegasi or a unicorn, then a missing leg wouldn't have been as big of an issue. But a missing leg to an earth pony is a missing wing to a Pegasi. It was hardly anything fancy, made of wood without any joints, causing Peggy to have to walk a bit strangely with it. But it did its job. I was hired by the weather factory when I was an artist. They wanted me to predict the colour of spectra that ponies would make, which would make good, which would make bad. I tested the spectra produced for its quality, if it was A, B, or C class spectra. Then it would be sent to the production facility. As Thornbred expected, Peggy hardly spoke much. It was all she felt she needed to say. "Why you specifically? Surely there are many Pegasi artists that could have done the job." Luna spoke, confused on why an earth pony would be sent to Cloudsdale for a job. It felt very impractical. I had always had a good grasp of colour, more than any pony I knew. Something to do with my eyes. Peggy responded. "I thought your eyes looked different, perhaps a bat pony relative of some kind." Luna responded, looking over at Nocturne for a bit before looking back. "Were you involved with the events Thornbred and Azure shared?" Celestia spoke, taking the conversation back towards the focus. "I was. I was the one who fought Rainbow Dash, pushed her into the machine. Thornbred pulled me out before I was dragged in with her." "And how many times were you present for the—" Celestia froze. She didn't know what to call the procedure of operation of the PEGASUS device. It felt wrong to call it manufacturing or processing, but there were very few words that would have worked better. After a few rebellion attempts, I was assigned there to help stop any foals flying away. Rainbow Dash made it very clear she didn't want a repeat of Scootaloo. Another gasp, followed by silence. Every pony knew Scootaloo had gone missing, just not where. Having it confirmed what happened to her would have been nice under any other circumstances, but this time it was more painful, knowing that not only was she killed by her best friend, but also that she almost escaped her fate, just to be dragged back into it once again. "And what made you change your mind after so long?" Celestia broke the silence, trying to not let every pony dwell on the news that they had just heard for too long. "Thornbred spoke to me, told me that I was more than just a cog in a machine, one that had choice over my future. It made me change my mind." Thornbred could feel his face turning red. He always got slightly embarrassed when receiving compliments, even in a situation like this. "Well, thank you, Peggy Frameholt. You may return to your seat." Celestia once again checked in with Luna, seeing if she was keeping up with the transcript of what had been said by each pony. After a few seconds and a nod from Luna, Celestia continued. "Our final witness, Dr. Crowhop, the highest currently available manager of Subsection 7R. Dr. Crowhop walked to the stand, glaring at Thornbred and Azure as he did. Thornbred was confused, and slightly concerned, at what he would say in response to the situation. He was manipulative, and whilst he doubted that it would work on royalty, he didn't want to take that chance. "Celestia, I believe that throughout all of this, no one has addressed that what we were doing was necessary for so much of equestrian life. How many rainbows and celebrations, weddings, royal coronations would you have all missed out on? What we were doing in Subsection 7R was a necessary evil for the better of all ponies in Equestria, one bestowed upon us by yourself all those years ago. Would any pony here deny orders from royalty?" Crowhop turned to the crowd, but they were all meeting his gaze with looks of disgust and anger towards him. "When I assigned those duties onto Pegasi, I never said to do it in this way. The value of a rainbow is drastically less than the lives of foals. If you felt that this was the only way, then you should have notified me." "But I wasn't the one told to do so. I was simply following up on all those before me, all those Pegasi that ran the weather factory. Could I let them down? No. I have loyalty to the weather factory in Cloudsdale, just like every other Pegasi, just like you have to Equestria, just like Rainbow Dash taught us to have as the element of loyalty." "Now listen here," Applejack yelled out, fighting back the tears. "No amount of loyalty justifies what you have done. What's one element without all the others? You are hardly being counter-generous to all those foals now." "Applejack is right," Twilight continues. "Using the elements of harmony to justify your actions is the opposite of what they were intended to do. The elements bring together ponykind. You have driven families and friends apart." The crowd begins to murmur in agreement with Twilight and the elements of harmony. Dr. Crowhop glances around, his once confident and arrogant demeanour quickly fading as he begins to realise the extent of the situation. "I believe it to be best if you sat down, Crowhop, for the better of you and every pony in this room," Luna commanded. "You are hardly innocent, Luna. You witnessed all the dreams and nightmares about the Weather Factory. Why did you not intervene? Why didn't any of you?" Dr. Crowhop begins to yell out aggressively, flaring his wings out like he did once before with Thornbred during one of their meetings. "Luna did know about the dreams and nightmares," Celestia yells out in defense of her sister. "She told me about them. What you were doing was so outlandish and cruel that we believe they were simply just nightmares. We have faith in our subject not to do what you have done. Even then, Luna tried to aid all she could in the dream realm. Your workers were simply so scared of their higher-ups, they wouldn't even tell royalty." The room fell silent. Celestia rarely got angry or yelled in front of her subjects. Seeing it was a rare sight. Luna was also shocked by this. Having some pony defend her so vigorously was unexpected. But it was nice to know that her sister wanted to protect her as much as she could in events like this, despite all their prior squabbles. "Sit down before I command the guards to force you to." Crop was wide-eyed as his wings fell to his side. He was amongst those who were completely shocked by Celestia's actions. He began to slowly retreat to his seat, clearly still shaken by what Celestia had said. Celestia continued to question all the guards and scientists, even receiving the notes and stories of the foals that were present too. After all that was said and done, she, alongside Twilight, Luna and Cadence, had left the room to decide what the best course of action would be. The next minutes were tense. The room fell into silence aside from the still gentle sobs and cries from most ponies. Thornbred could only sit and think about the events that had occurred, what he had said. He could only hope that Peggy and Barnshed weren't included in whatever punishment the Alicorns chose. All he could do is wait. Eventually, the four Alicorns walked back into the room, stern looks on their face as they returned to their chairs. "We, the Alicorns of Equestria, had decided on a punishment for all those involved with the production and managing of Subsection 7R, Celestia announced. "All personnel will be required to pay a fine to all the affected families, alongside community service." "Peggy and Barnshed," Celestia pauses. "Due to your involvement in stopping the production of rainbows, we believe it would be unfair to punish you as we would the others." Thornbred sighed a sigh of relief. He was glad to hear that Celestia wouldn't be punishing them. They had proved a change of heart after all. "Dr. Crowhop." Celestia looked towards the Pegasi, a scowl on her face. "We do not believe the punishment provided for the others is appropriate for you either. Another punishment is required." Every pony went silent, awaiting the verdict that the princess would give. "You will be turned to stone." Many moons had passed, and a lot had changed since the trial of the Rainbow Factory. Shortly after the trial, Celestia relinquished Cloudsdale of their duty in controlling the weather, instead setting up a weather factory of her own in Canterlot, thus allowing it to be closely monitored by guards and royalty at a moment's notice. Many of the employees from the weather factory in Cloudsdale moved to the new Canterlot weather factory. That was of course if they still wanted to work there. It was identical to much of Cloudsdale weather factory. However, no one could figure out an efficient way to produce rainbows at such a large scale, leaving the production of rainbows on an indefinite hold for the time being. As for the Cloudsdale weather factory, it was investigated further by Celestia, Luna and the remaining elements of Harmony. The investigation went smoothly, with enough of the factory being familiar enough to them from the many tours and visits they had conducted. That was until they came face to face with a door. Subsection 7R. Their time there was short, only taking an hour or so before they emerged outside the factory, a distinct smell of death lingering over them. Shocked and sick looks were across all of their faces. Not even Celestia or Luna were free from the feeling of nausea caused by 7R's contents. The remains of foals and fillies in the waste disposal room, the scratches all over the walls of spectre production. The most harrowing of all was the PEGASUS device. The machine was already intimidating enough, knowing what it had been used for. But the shimmering full vats of spectra lining the wall was more disturbing. In truth, it was beautiful, bright and saturated colours that would be great in a dress or a drink or paint. But it was the remains of Rainbow Dash.
All the pain and torment she went through to get to this point really proved that suffering produced the best spectra. Celestia ordered the factory to be demolished, except for Subsection 7R. She simply stated that no pony should be exposed to the horrors of 7R. She wasn't going to leave it in Cloudsdale, however. She did have a plan. The guards and scientists could dismantle it instead of community service elsewhere, if they so desired. They were already well aware of what happened inside, so it was unlikely to affect them as harshly as it would any other Pegasi. It wouldn't take long for the entire factory to be reduced to piles of rubble and metal. Most of the machines and materials would help with construction of the cantilope of the factory. The PEGASUS device was not among them, instead being turned into a memorial to all those who had lost their lives to it. It would stand in place of the weather factory, a large metal wall with the names of the fallen stamped into its surface, a reminder of what had happened. As for Dr. Crowhop, he was turned to stone and placed next to the monument itself, to remember how evil and disgusting a pony's actions can be. Most ponies believe that once a creature is turned to stone, it can no longer hear or see the world around it. Celestia knew that this was in fact a lie. Dr. Crowhop could hear everything, all the murmurs of visiting ponies about him, all speaking of how horrified and disgusted they were at him. It would last for hundreds, maybe even thousands, of years. All the Alicorns agreed it was a fitting punishment. Azure continued to work with the weather. It was her special talent after all. At first, she was among the staff to move to the Cantilope Weather Factory, but it was hard to shake off the feeling from Cloudsdale, the tense nature of her surroundings, the constant feeling of being watched, the worry that a guard would come out of the dark and drag her back to 7R. It was all too much to handle. After telling Celestia this, she was moved to the Weather Announcement Division. For most Pegasi, this was an easy job. Fly from place to place and tell every pony what the day's weather was going to be. This wasn't so easy for Azure on account of the missing wings. Instead, she was gifted a hot air balloon, allowing her to continue spreading the weather in her own way. Whilst it may have been called boring or simple, it was hard to deny that she loved every minute of it. Thornbred decided to stick around. He went to live in Ponyville, a quiet little village near enough to Canterlot. It was a big change from the bustling streets of Manhattan. After what he had been through, maybe a moment of quiet was in order anyhow. He found a job in the nearby hospital, using his experience and research to help ponies in need. It was a rewarding career, seeing many of the FSD sufferers getting better and returning to their old selves once more. He even ended up helping many of the guards and scientists too, breaking the conditioning that the factory had placed upon them. On the side, he continued to research into mental diseases and disorders from across Equestria at the Canterlot Library, even continuing to write up his reports from Subsection 7R. Whilst it was gruesome and painful to remember, Thornbred felt that a conclusion or an ending to it would provide useful for himself and those involved. One of his patients was Peggy. Like many of the guards, she didn't have anywhere to go after the closure of the weather factory, lacking a home or a family to return to. Instead, she went to live with Thornbred. At first, focus was on reintroducing her to society slowly. It was a stark contrast to Subsection 7R, so he didn't want to overwhelm her. Seeing her develop her personality in her own life was the most rewarding of all. She eventually ended up beginning to draw once more, making small flipbooks for the fillies of Ponyville in her spare time. Most were still scared of her to a degree. A large build, missing leg and eye, could be intimidating to some, but over time the ponies of Ponyville got used to her, even beginning to like her and respect her work. It was hard to deny that Thornbred was starting to like her too. The thought of her made his wings flutter and his heart thump in his chest. With all that the two had been through, all the dangers of 7R and the struggles of afterwards, he didn't want to let her go. Thornbred eventually ended up asking her out on a date at Mareburger. It was hardly anything fancy, of which in response Peggy said yes. From then on out, things only got more and more serious between the two, eventually leading to Thornbred proposing. The plans for a wedding were nothing special, a small event with only a wingful of ponies attending. Since the incident at Cloudsdale Weather Factory, the two had avoided awards and celebrations of what happened. Peggy was simply unable to comprehend that she was deserving of a celebration, whilst Thornbred felt that they should be mourning the loss of all the lives of foals instead of celebrating theirs. They had rejected many gifts, cakes, money and all sorts from the ponies of Equestria. Most didn't understand why. Who wouldn't want free gifts and celebrations? But no one could really force them to accept. That was until the ponies of Ponyville heard of the upcoming wedding. Azure had told them, believing that despite what her friends may think, a celebration was in order. And what better time than their wedding? Ponies went from house to house, recruiting any pony they could for various parts of the surprise event. The whole of Ponyville was involved. Lily Valley prepared flowers and bouquets, Vinyl Octavia were to play music during the ceremony, Pinkie Pie would bake the most fantastic cake. Fluttershy would bring doves and an array of her animal friends. Applejack would bring all kinds of apple-themed desserts. Lotus and Aloe would help any pony with their mane and makeup, and Rarity would create dresses and suits for the bride, groom, and any other pony who wanted to attend. How she would get these sizes correct was a whole different issue. The plan eventually spread outside of Ponyville too, reaching Canterlot and Cloudsdale, where more ponies would offer their assistance with the event. The day had arrived. Many ponies had spent all night setting up the venue, decorations, and music. They all wanted it to be perfect for when the bride and groom arrived. Rarity had her dresses and garments on standby, and to every pony's surprise, Celestia and Luna even offered to make an appearance. Many ponies even joked that this wedding would rival the wedding of Cadence and Shining Armour, hopefully without the appearance of Chrysalis. Azure was the one to lead them there. She had blindfolded the two before leading them over to the town centre, where every pony was waiting. It was a little confusing at first. Thornbred believed that they were at some other event. He had only ever seen this many ponies in one place during a musical performance or a play, but the clues and hints quickly became obvious. The floral archway, the birds singing, the white cake with the two ponies on top. This was his wedding. This was further enforced by Rarity pulling him aside, excited to get him into his new tailored suit. Peggy didn't respond. She had never been to a wedding, so she didn't quite know what to expect. While she had begun to reintegrate into society, she still wasn't familiar with lots of the standards and practices of different events. As Thornbred was led away by Rarity, Azure and Lotus similarly led Peggy towards a tent, rambling on about makeup and how pretty she was going to look. It made no sense, but they seemed to be happy at least. The suit fit perfectly. Not too tight, but not too loose. He had no idea how Rarity had done it, but he could only assume that years of experience could allow a talented seamstress like herself to do anything. Rarity led Thornbred to the top of the aisle, where both Luna and Celestia were stood. He always admired the princesses, especially Luna, so having them officiate his wedding was definitely a pleasant surprise. The music started, originally starting as an elegant cello rendition of the bridal chorus from Octavia, but it was clear from the synth piano and the more techno tones that vinyl did have a hoof in the production of the track. Every pony fell silent as the procession began. Thornbred's younger sister, Applebloom, Sweetbell, and Spike threw red rose petals across the aisle with Peggy following behind. It was clear that the dress was a tad too small for the bigger mare. Maybe Rarity wasn't able to estimate sizes as well as Thornbred had originally believed. But even with the clear mistake, he couldn't deny that the Spa ponies had worked their magic. She was beautiful. They'd even provided a white eye patch and a wooden leg to match. Peggy stopped in front of him. Despite all the makeup and mane styling, Peggy still looked generally neutral about the situation. It was how she always looked, and it was hard to deny that Thornbred would have it any other way. "We are brought here today to celebrate the union of two very special ponies," Celestia spoke. Even she and Luna were dressed up particularly nice for the occasion. "Thornbred and Peggy, two ponies who bravely saved many lives and also improved the lives of those around them with their kindness, honesty, generosity, laughter, and loyalty. It is ponies like these that bring more magic to Equestria than any alicorn could." Thornbred was bright red once again. He was prepared for the wedding that he had imagined, a small number of ponies listening as he read his vows, but suddenly being faced with what felt like the entirety of Equestria, while Princess Celestia commended them for their actions, was already becoming a bit much. Luna took over from her sister. She often disliked large events like this, especially during the daytime as she was often recovering from her nightly duties, but even she appeared happy to attend. "You have both faced much adversity and kept calm in the face of danger and demise. For that, I commend thee." Celestia bowed her head with a smile, speaking softly to Thornbred and Peggy alone. "If there are any vows that you have written, now would be the time to say them." Thornbred gulped, holding the cards that he had written. "Peggy, our first introduction may have been unfortunate, being in a place of sadness and anguish, but I knew you were a sweet and caring mare under your mask, one who was misunderstood, one who was frustrated at the world, but also one that had so much to give given the chance. I'm glad I gave you that chance. Seeing you grow and achieve so much after what you had been through was some of the proudest moments of my life. It was at that point that I decided that I want to spend every future moment of my life by your side. They say that the best stallions are forged in the hottest fires, but I think that also applies to relationships as well. And with all that we have been through, we should be pretty much indestructible." Thornbred smiled at Peggy with a blush as he dropped his cards back into his suit pocket. He was embarrassed. Everything he said was true, just having so many ponies hear it was the issue. Celestia turned her head to Peggy, suggesting that if there was anything to say, she should say it now. There were no cards or notes from Peggy, but she did begin to speak. It was carefully said. every word pre-planned before even leaving her mind. The factory was a dark and unforgiving place, one that left me cold and hateful towards the outside world. I was scared to leave, not only because of what might happen to me, but also because I was afraid that I could not adapt to the outside. All I knew was to do what I was told. It became my life, my sense of being, my sense of normality. But you stopped that. You broke the cycle, snapping me back to reality, the one based in love and forgiveness. Many are still scared of me. The blood on my hooves will never wash clean. But with you by my side, it doesn't matter. You believed in me, told me that I was free to do what I wanted, despite what others may think. And I do not think I could ever express how thankful I am, through kindness or love. So I will say it now. Thank you for believing in me, never giving up on me, always seeing the best in me. I do not know where I would be without you. It was the most Peggy had ever really said in front of Thornbred, and whilst to many of the onlookers it may have not seemed like much, he knew that it was honest and true, a message of gratitude and passion towards him. It was almost enough to make Thornbred cry. "If there are no other objections," Celestia smiled, looking back upwards towards the crowd. Her and Luna's horn began to glow as they hovered over two golden rings, inscribed and carved with intricate patterns resembling the stained glass window in the Canonical castle. "I, Princess Celestia of the Sun." "And I, Princess Luna of the Moon," Luna boomed, as both sisters opened their wings, displaying the contrasting white and blue to the fullest. "Declare the groom bride as royally wed in potentiam eleganta." Both sisters smiled. Luna wasn't updated on modern wedding proceedings, causing her to use the outdated Latin that Equestria once spoke. They pulled Thornbred's and Peggy's tail through the ring, firmly securing it at the base of their tail. Music began to play once more as Peggy and Thornbred gently nuzzled their noses together before trotting down the aisle. Whilst neither of them wanted a celebration or praise, it was hard to deny that it felt good. That was until a loud bang followed by confetti. Thornbred jolted upwards before realising it was just one of Pinkie Pie's party cannons. It wouldn't be a Pinkie Pie party without one. The party followed soon after. The cake, the music, and the games that Pinkie Pie set up. It was all just perfect. Aside from hastily learning that Peggy disliked cake frosting. Most ponies knew that there was one thing missing. During events like this, Cloudsdale Weather Factory would often provide a complimentary rainbow to the couples to celebrate the day. It was almost a tradition of sorts among the ponies, a symbol of joy and love. No wedding would be complete without one. And neither would this wedding too. There was a whoosh sound as 7 wonderbolts sped across the sky, all followed by large trails of coloured smoke. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet. It was a rainbow, one produced without the death of foals and all the torture of 7R. As every pony gasped and cooed in awe, the smoke quickly began to mix and disperse, fading away after only a couple of seconds in the sky. As the blue sky above broke through, Thornbred couldn't help but smile. Rainbows were often seen as these beautiful events that lit up the sky with their bright hues. Not having them made him realise that the world was already beautiful enough.